Daenerys Targaryen felt the blistering sun beating down upon her shoulders as she stood upon a wooden platform overlooking the city of Astapor. Her silver-gold hair, braided in the style of her house, clung to the nape of her neck in the coastal humidity. The air carried the stench of sweat, salt, and something even sharper, the pervasive tang of cruelty that seemed to cling to every brick in the city of slavers. Rows upon rows of Unsullied stood before her, faces blank, bodies rigid, the perfect soldiers for a perfect war. She had come for them in one way or another, but at that moment she was at a crossroads that would define her future. She had observed their discipline. She had listened to the ghastly tales of their training, the ways in which each boy was molded into a creature of cold efficiency, each emotion flensed away under the lash of ruthless masters. She had gazed into their lifeless eyes and wondered if any hint of self could possibly remain within. What she discovered in those eyes was a reflection of her own past, and how often she had been shaped by forces beyond her control, by Viserys, by Khal Drogo, by the illusions of her destiny. Yet these soldiers, who had perhaps never known the softness of freedom, had one thing she did not: a unity of purpose. They were unwavering, and for a woman seeking the Iron Throne, unwavering soldiers were exactly the kind of power she needed. She remembered the scene in the chamber of Krasny's Emonaklos. His mocking voice, his sneers, how he called her a little whore, and treated her like a naive child with bright, wandering eyes. He offered her the Unsullied, at an exorbitant price, hinting that he believed she was too weak to utilize them well. She recalled how she had once considered turning the tables on him, how the notion of freeing the Unsullied had flickered in her heart like a candle in a room full of shadows. But that was not the path she was about to choose. At least not in this life. Not in this alternate turn of fate. When she stood on that platform, her dragons still small but ferocious in their own right, it occurred to her that she was desperate to forge her own army. Desperate to break the cycle of men who would disrespect her, use her name for their own ends, and then discard her. By that point, her illusions of safety in Qarth had been crushed. She had lost faith that she could negotiate her way to power. She needed strength, immediate and unquestioning. She needed the Unsullied. The bargain demanded that she trade one of her dragons for 8,000 Unsullied. When the idea first crossed her mind, it felt like betrayal. Her dragons were not only her children, they were living, breathing symbols of House Targaryen's rebirth. They were integral to who she was, a part of her blood and her claim. Yet the deeper part of her recognized another truth. Dragons were incredible, unstoppable creatures, but they were still small. They grew slowly compared to the speed at which her enemies multiplied. If she delayed, if she tried to sail to Westeros with only 3 half-grown dragons and a ragtag Khalasar, she risked annihilation. An army of Unsullied, on the other hand, would ensure an immediate and overwhelming advantage in open conflict. So she stood there, the contract forged in the presence of everyone who was anyone in Astapor's slaver hierarchy. Krasny's gloated, convinced that the Targaryen girl was a fool to trade a dragon for any number of men. He believed, as so many men did, that she was a pawn of her own vanity. A boyish grin curled on his lips whenever he imagined what he saw as her stupidity. But Daenerys listened to his taunts, accepted them coolly, and revealed no outward sign of her inner turmoil. She clutched the binding rod used to command the Unsullied, feeling the rough polished wood beneath her palms as if it were a scepter that signified her own sovereignty, not just over these slave soldiers but over her destiny. And when Krasny's demanded the payment, she gave it. She presented Drogon, who let out shrieks of protest in her arms, wings beating the air. In another life, another story, she would have commanded Drogon to burn that slaver where he stood. She would have broken the chains of the Unsullied, flung the whip to the ground, and told them they were free. But at this juncture, that glimmer of mercy flickered, drowned by the enormity of her ambition and the immediacy of her fear. She did not trust that men trained to obey would instinctively choose to follow her if freed. She did not trust that Astapor wouldn't rise against her, leaving her to flee yet again into the unknown with her newly liberated soldiers slipping through her fingers. In that moment, fear spoke louder than compassion, and the idea of risking everything felt too high a price to pay. Thus, in the middle of Astapor's great plaza with throngs of onlookers crowding balconies and rooftops, Daenerys Targaryen did not speak the word Dracarys. She did not enact the perfect betrayal. Instead, she solemnly handed Drogon's chain to Krasny's Mo Naklas, her face a careful mask. She tightened her grip on the whip, looked out across the sea of Unsullied, and felt a mingling of triumph and dread take hold in her belly. The Unsullied were hers now, hers to lead, but not to free. When Krasny's tried to wrestle Drogon under his control, the young dragon screeched and spat fire at the air in protest, but Daenerys averted her eyes. She couldn't watch him struggle. This was the price she had accepted. By capturing her dragon, Krasny's believed he had taken the most potent symbol of her might, but Daenerys knew she still possessed her other two dragons. She could buy time for them to grow and hopefully reclaim Drogon or birth new dragons if the worst came to pass. It was an agonizing gamble, but the cost of victory often demanded heartbreaking sacrifice. She spun around, addressed the Unsullied in High Valyrian, each phrase dropping from her lips with the regal intonation she had cultivated since birth. Though she once struggled with the language, she had forced herself to learn it well enough to command them clearly. "You belong to me now," she said, her voice quavering slightly beneath the stoic calm. "I am Daenerys Storeborn of House Targaryen, the unburnt, mother of dragons, and you will fight for me." Silence reigned. The only sound was the distant cry of Drogon protesting his new captivity. Daenerys swallowed and drew a deep breath, projecting a firmer tone. "Kneel." As one, the Unsullied dropped to their knees, heads bowed in submission. Daenerys felt a pulse of power, hot and bright, surge through her veins. This was no partial alliance, no uncertain loyalty. This was absolute dominion. Yet her heart clenched. In acquiring that dominion, she had alienated that fragile sense of moral purity that had begun to bloom in her mind. Deep down, she knew some line had been crossed. Krasny's laughed, pulling at Drogon's chain. "He does not seem pleased by your new arrangement," he mocked in the common tongue, eyes narrowing. Though she had not revealed she understood every word of his vile commentary from the beginning, she made no attempt to correct him. She simply turned, careful to keep her expression schooled into neutrality. "A fair trade, no?" he asked. "Very fair," she answered softly, ignoring Drogon's pained screech. Krasny signaled to his men, who rushed forward to place shackles back onto the line of Unsullied. Daenerys swallowed a lump in her throat, reminded in that moment that she still permitted these men to remain enslaved in every sense but ownership. She had the power to unchain them, but she clutched to a fear that once freed, they might not see her as their rightful queen. She also recalled the warnings that unscrupulous men across Essos might hire these soldier eunuchs if they were no longer bound by a single master. It all felt too unstable. She needed the Unsullied as a cohesive instrument, not as liberated individuals who might drift away from her cause. So she said nothing. Behind her, Missandei stood silent, eyes weary. The little scribe had once told Daenerys of her own life in chains, of her stolen childhood. Daenerys felt a pang of guilt, but her ambition prevailed. Today was not the day she would challenge the entire slave system of Astapor. Today, she was playing the game. And the game demanded she keep the Unsullied under her absolute control. That night, Daenerys and her meager retinue took temporary lodging in one of the massive stone buildings that skirted Astapor's plaza. The walls were red bricks, old and chipped, giving it a vaguely menacing aura. Inside, it smelled of dampness and stale incense. A single open courtyard looked onto the black sky, revealing more stars than Daenerys ever remembered from her nights in Qarth. But she found little solace in their distant light. She spent the night in restless half-sleep, haunted by the echo of Drogon's roars. Come morning, the Unsullied were marched to the yard, the clamor of their feet like a hammer beating a steady, inexorable rhythm into the ground. Daenerys, from the balcony, observed how seamlessly they maneuvered, how instantly they obeyed the commands barked by the overseers. But when her eyes passed over those shaved heads and the jumbled mass of spears, she detected no individual spark. The men were nearly featureless. Only one soldier in their ranks looked up at her in that moment as if he felt her gaze. She could not be certain it was the same man she had glimpsed before, one who had hesitated when a child was killed to prove the soldier's obedience. But something in his eyes flickered like the stirring of a conscience that refused to die. She felt an odd, subtle tug in her chest, a pang of sorrow or regret. Yet she pressed her lips thin and turned away. Krasny's had demanded she remain in Astapor at least a fortnight so the city's notables could feast in her honor and finalize certain paperwork that would transfer the Unsullied's ownership. She recognized it as a thinly veiled power move, a chance for the slavers to flaunt their new dragon and reassure themselves of their place in the hierarchy. Meanwhile, she would have to endure endless dinners, forced smiles, and the scorn of men who took delight in thinking her a fool. Sometimes she wondered whether a single word of High Valyrian from her mouth might append their smugness, but then she reconsidered, reminding herself that the advantage of secrecy was worth the indignity of their insults. On the second night, Krasny's hosted a grand banquet at his luxurious manse. Braziers lined the marble steps leading to the entrance, their flames dancing in the warm breeze. Inside, mosaic floors depicted the cities of Slavers Bay triumphant over barbarian hordes. Massive columns soared to an arching ceiling painted with the images of Astapori heroes bestowing chains upon kneeling figures. Daenerys glided through the hall in a dress of midnight blue embroidered at the hem with the three-headed dragon of her house. She held her posture like a queen, chin lifted, back straight, even as the coarse stares of leering men followed her path. Music played on flutes and drums, haunting and alive. Slaves carried trays of spiced wine, honeyed locusts, and other delicacies Daenerys scarcely recognized. Krasny's was enthroned at the head of the table wearing robes of crimson silk. He had placed Drogon on a long chain behind his seat. The dragon's wings were pinned at the base with leather straps to keep the creature from launching into the air. Drogon's eyes darted frantically around the room, the pupils narrow slits of pure malice revealing the proud beast's fury at its captivity. Every time Daenerys gazed at the dragon, her insides twisted, but she concealed it beneath an impassive expression. Krasny's greeted her with practiced ostentation. "Ah, my dear queen of the Westerosi. Come, take a seat of honor. And see how your child fares in his new abode." His accent in the common tongue was thick, his grin insufferable. He gestured grandly to Drogon as if showing off a rare caged bird. "He struggles still, but soon he will accept who holds the real power here." Daenerys inclined her head in a courteous gesture. "I thank you for your hospitality," she said softly. She avoided looking into Drogon's wild eyes, focusing instead on the slaver's wide, arrogant face. Throughout the night, she feigned small talk with Astapor's other wealthy men, those with entire fleets for trade, those who lorded over local politics. They told her of their city's storied past, of how the Unsullied had always been the pride of Astapor, and how it was the city's duty to maintain the tradition of training such soldiers. Some of them made lewd comments about how she might put the Unsullied to use. Others muttered jests about turning her into a concubine if her luck ran out. Daenerys responded with demure smiles, letting their remarks slither off her spine like so many insects. She would not give them the satisfaction of reaction. As the feast wore on, she found a moment to slip away from the crowd. She made her way around the great table, ignoring the calls of inebriated guests, and approached Drogon. 2 guards stood watch, each with a goad in hand to keep the dragon subdued. When she came near, Drogon let out a low growl that made the men tighten their grips on their weapons. Daenerys placed a trembling hand on Drogon's scaled side, feeling the rapid pounding of his heart. 1,000 memories rushed back, hatching the eggs in Drogo's funeral pyre, the scorched air surrounding her as she emerged unburnt, the first time Drogon had perched on her shoulder. His eyes flicked toward her, burning with anger and pain. She whispered softly in Valyrian, "I'm sorry, my child. I did this to you, but there was no other way." She could almost believe the dragon understood her words. His growling dimmed, replaced by a harsh rasp of breath. One of the guards shoved his goad forward with a crude grin, the tip sparking with electricity from some contraption hidden within, but Daenerys glared at him. He lowered the goad. She returned to her seat, forcing composure even though it felt as if each step threatened to shatter her resolve. Later in the evening, after the banquet ended, she retreated to her chambers. Missandei followed her quietly, as she did most nights, to help Daenerys undo the braids in her hair and prepare for bed. The chamber was sparse, containing only a bed of polished wood, a wash basin, and a single narrow window overlooking Astapor's labyrinthine streets. Daenerys sat on the edge of the bed while Missandei began to unwind her braids with gentle fingers. Silence reigned for a time, thick and charged with unspoken tension. Finally, the queen spoke, her voice low. "You have served me loyally, Missandei. You're a slave in this city, but if you want to return to Noth, I could. I have no one left in Noth," Missandei said. "And I follow you because I believe in you." Her gaze dropped. "Yet I do not understand why you keep the Unsullied in chains." Daenerys closed her eyes. "They are my army now. They are the only way I can reach the Iron Throne. If I were to liberate them, how can I be certain they would remain? A few might, but most, I suspect, would drift away. Their loyalty to me isn't tested enough. And the city might see it as a sign of weakness or an act of rebellion. I do not have the forces to fend off Astapor if they consider my move a betrayal. Then I would be alone again, with no army, no alliances." Missandei listened, her silence a careful neutrality. After a moment, she asked, "Is that what you truly want, my queen?" Daenerys stared at her reflection in the wash basin's water. She remembered how she had once wanted to break the wheel of tyranny to uproot every system of slavery and oppression. But the wheel turned slowly. She was not sure she could break it without shattering herself. "I want what is mine by right, the 7 kingdoms," she said. "And I want the power to keep it once I have it." She paused, letting the words weigh upon her. "I cannot pity every slave I meet, or else I'll never accomplish what I must." Missandei nodded, though there was something in her eyes, perhaps a trace of heartbreak. Still, she continued unbraiding Daenerys's hair without judgment, loyal in her own way. The days in Astapor lengthened into weeks. Krasnys, flush with the pride of his newly acquired dragon, paraded Drogon around the city like a trophy, conjuring small flames to amuse the crowds. Daenerys gritted her teeth, reminding herself that she had secured 8,000 unsullied, 8,000 unstoppable soldiers. The price of that power was a single dragon. A dragon she prayed she could someday reclaim. While the finishing details of the contract were settled, Daenerys took every opportunity to drill with the Unsullied. She rose at dawn, donned simple riding leathers, and took her place at the training grounds. She wanted to see firsthand how these warriors moved, how they listened, how quickly they adapted to new commands. At first, the slavers insisted on commanding them for her, but she refused. "They are mine," she said, and the overseers grudgingly stepped back. She tested them with new formations she had read about from the histories of Aegon the Conqueror. She ordered them to run spear drills, to practice shield walls, to form phalanxes. Each time, they complied with flawless coordination. Their eyes remained dull, but their limbs executed every movement without a moment's hesitation. At times, Daenerys felt a queasy awe at their mechanical obedience, but she disguised it beneath a veneer of pride. During one such session, when the sun climbed high and the air shimmered with heat, Daenerys spotted the same unsullied soldier who had once glanced at her with something approaching humanity. He stood in the second row of a phalanx, spear angled precisely. His face, like all the others, was expressionless. The line advanced under her command, shields locked, steps measured. Dust swirled around their sandaled feet. Daenerys walked beside them. "Hold," she commanded, and at once they froze. She continued pacing up and down, observing. "You," she said, pointing to the soldier with those searching eyes. "Step forward." He obeyed, gaze fixed on the horizon. "Name?" she asked. "I have none," he replied in a monotone voice. The sound of his speech was jarring in the hush. She had almost forgotten that the Unsullied gave up their names, took up new designations each day, Grey Worm, White Rat, and so forth, until none of them retained any identity from birth. Yet hearing him say, "I have none," made her chest tighten. She lifted a hand to gently press the tip of his spear aside. "For today you are Grey Worm," she said, recalling the name from another lifetime. He offered no response. Daenerys cleared her throat and placed a hand on his shoulder, feeling the heat of the sun-baked leather beneath her palm. "You belong to me now. I lead. You follow. Do you understand?" "Yes, my queen," he replied, though his eyes still betrayed a flicker of curiosity. She released him, stepping back. "Return to the line." He did so, and the drill resumed. That night, Daenerys dreamed of dragons and Unsullied. She dreamed of a great battle in which she stood astride a monstrous black beast, raining fire upon armies of Lannisters and Baratheons. Below, 8,000 Unsullied marched unflinchingly through flames to strike down her foes. A bright red door floated in her vision, the same one that haunted her from childhood memories of Bravos or Pentos. She could not quite place it. On the other side of that door, she sensed freedom. But each time she pushed it open, the lock sprang back in to place. She woke trembling, half remembering the shriek of a dragon. Tears on her cheeks she didn't recall shedding. Finally, the day came when the contract was signed, official and irrevocable. Krasnys and his slaver council demanded a final display of her new army's capabilities. Daenerys stood once again upon the wooden platform in the plaza, hands clasped behind her back, as the Unsullied were lined up before her. Krasnys paced behind them with a smug grin. Missandei at Daenerys' side offered quiet translations when needed, though Daenerys understood the slaver's words perfectly. "Queen Daenerys," Krasnys announced, "behold the greatest soldiers the world has ever known, now firmly under your control. Use them wisely, or not. It matters little to me, as long as I profit." He waved a dismissive hand. Daenerys stared at the rows of men, her men by law. The broadness of that power made her heart beat uncomfortably fast. If she gave a single command, they would march across the entire city for her, for good or ill. She moved forward, the sharp clang of her boots against the platform resonating. She raised the whip that signified her dominion over the Unsullied, the throng of onlookers watching. "Unsullied," she called out in High Valyrian. "Form ranks for inspection." Instantly, they snapped to attention, the sound of thousands of spears rattling into position sending a thrill through the crowd. The final step of this display was a mock skirmish, pitting the Unsullied against a group of hired pit fighters. The pit fighters boasted that they could bring down at least a few of the eunuch soldiers. The match was brutal, quick, and lethal. The pit fighters rushed forward with savage yells, brandishing curved blades and axes. The Unsullied responded with disciplined thrusts. Within moments, the pit fighters lay dead or dying in the dust, while the Unsullied stood unscathed, breathing evenly. The crowd roared in grim approval, though some looked disturbed by the calm efficiency of Daenerys's men. Afterwards, Krasny scowled slightly, perhaps frustrated that he could not see any flaw in the warriors he'd just sold. Daenerys took a private pleasure in his discomfort. He had her dragon, but she had a force that could topple cities. This uneasy arrangement was set. That evening, as she prepared to depart Astapor, Krasny's invited her to a final gathering. It was smaller than the lavish banquet, more of a private farewell. Daenerys suspected he wanted to flaunt Drogon's new training. He had tamed the dragon enough to perform certain tricks. Reluctantly, she went. In a corner of the courtyard, the beast lay chained, subdued but seething. Krasny's fed him small pieces of meat, snapping them out of the air with quick bursts of flame. Daenerys kept her composure, refusing to let him see her anguish. Their last conversation was fraught with veiled threats. Krasny's repeated the promise that if she tried to free any of the Unsullied in a manner that harmed Astapor's economy, he would consider it an act of war. He patted Drogon's head and said, "And I have the means to fight back now." Daenerys simply nodded. She had no illusions that her path out of Slaver's Bay would be smooth. She had also gained private knowledge that Yunkai and Meereen, the other great slave cities, were watching this transaction carefully. If she made one wrong move, they would intervene. So Daenerys turned her back on Krasny's, returned to her retinue, and gave the order to march. She reminded herself that vengeance would come at the right time, though her heart throbbed at the sound of Drogon's distant, keening roar echoing behind her. Thus began Daenerys Targaryen's long campaign across Essos with the 8,000 Unsullied in tow, and without her largest dragon. On the first night away from Astapor, the Unsullied set up a neat, orderly camp on the plains, tents aligned with geometric precision. Daenerys strolled through the lanes between tents, listening to the quiet. She had once traveled with a Khalasar, where nights were filled with rowdy laughter and the smell of roasting meat. Here the air was eerily calm. The eunuchs spoke only when necessary, and no campfires crackled beyond what was needed for cooking. She stopped before Grey Worm's tent, half expecting some greeting, but only silence greeted her. Eventually, she turned away. Over the following days, the column of soldiers wound across the red wasteland, forging northward. They passed scattered villages and small trading posts. Sometimes, Daenerys would see children stop in wonder at the sight of the massive host, quickly herded away by anxious parents. The sun beat down with punishing intensity, but the Unsullied marched without complaint. No talk of mutiny, no stragglers, no desertions. The power she held was formidable, and yet she found no comfort in it. She traded one form of tyranny for another. Instead of Astapor's yoke, the Unsullied now bowed under hers. One afternoon, her small council convened inside her tent. Ser Jorah Mormont sat to her right, face weathered and grim, but eyes lit with the old devotion he always seemed to have for his Khaleesi. Ser Barristan Selmy, still calling himself Arstan Whitebeard in disguise, kept quiet, watchful. Missandei hovered by Daenerys, prepared to translate if needed. Several of her Dothraki bloodriders stood at attention, arms crossed. Daenerys traced her finger over a rough map of Essos laid out on a travel chest. "Yunkai lies here," she said, tapping a spot west of Astapor. "They are known for training bed slaves. We have no direct quarrel with them, But if they suspect we plan to free or claim any of their property, they'll attempt to stop us. Ser Jorah cleared his throat. With respect, Your Grace, you now have an army that could overrun Yunkai if you wish. Yet, we have no need to linger here. If your goal is to return to Westeros, we could sail from one of the ports further north. Do we truly want to lay siege to Yunkai or Meereen? That might cost time and resources better spent across the narrow sea. Daenerys frowned slightly, fingers drumming on the map. I have not forgotten Westeros, she said. But if I arrive there with only these 8,000 Unsullied, will that be enough to wrest the 7 kingdoms from the Lannisters and their allies? We must be certain. And I suspect we'll need gold, ships, and more alliances to stand a chance. I recall that the Meereenese lords are rich. If they can be persuaded to support my claim, or if I can take their city, then I would have greater means to press my war abroad. Ser Barristan ventured, in his mild voice, I only caution, my queen, that war here is different from war in Westeros. These men might not welcome you as a liberator if you come with intentions to conquer. You may end up ruling a wasteland of resentful subjects. Daenerys pursed her lips. She thought of all the promises she had once made to herself about breaking chains. Yet she had chosen not to break them in Astapor. A small voice within her asked, would she do the same in Yunkai? In Meereen? Each city faced the same moral question. But outwardly, she said, I do not plan to subjugate all of Slavers Bay. But I will not let any city block my path to the throne. If they stand in my way, I will deal with them as I must. Jorah nodded, though concern shadowed his eyes. The meeting adjourned and Daenerys felt her chest tighten with worry. Every choice she made seemed fraught with peril. Every step forward threatened to drown her in blood and guilt. That night, she wandered through the camp alone, ignoring her guards' protests that it was unsafe. The sky was dark, pricked with stars. She made her way to the outskirts where a small stream ran. There, she found Grey Worm kneeling by the water, scrubbing his armor. He looked up as she approached, still wearing that impassive mask, though again she thought she caught the hint of a flicker in his eyes. My queen, he said, voice low. Daenerys folded her arms. You are their commander. Do you wish for anything? She wasn't sure why she asked. Perhaps she was searching for a sign that a spark of individuality existed somewhere in them. He paused, face inscrutable. My queen, I wish only to serve. It is all I have ever known. If I do it well, then I have done my duty. And what if you had a choice, she pressed. Would you stay with me? He lowered his gaze. I do not understand the question. Daenerys sighed. She gazed at the reflection of the moon in the stream. I suppose it was foolish of me to ask. Good night, Grey Worm. She turned away, but his voice halted her. I remember only fragments, my queen, he said quietly. I remember being taken as a boy. I remember the pain. The whips. The words they used to break us. He hesitated, fists clenched around his wet armor. But sometimes, I remember sunlight on tall grass, the smell of warm bread. Maybe it was my mother. Maybe it was a dream. I do not know. Daenerys's breath caught. She glanced over her shoulder. I see, she said softly. I'm sorry. He said nothing more, and Daenerys left him there, feeling the weight of his memories pressing upon her conscience. By the time they reached the outskirts of Yunkai, the scorching desert winds had coated every soldier in a fine layer of dust. Before them lay the city's high yellow walls, topped with watchtowers. Banners of a golden harpy flapped in the wind. Scouts reported that Yunkai had hired mercenaries, possibly the Second Sons or the Stormcrows, to defend the city if Daenerys turned aggressive. She camped her army a few miles away, deciding to parley first. That evening, a group of Yunkish dignitaries arrived in gaudy litters carried by slaves. Daenerys had the Unsullied form a silent wall behind her as she received the envoys. Their leader, a plump man swathed in bright silks, offered a forced smile. Great Queen of the Undulls, we welcome you to Yunkai. We hope your business here is peaceful. Yes. Daenerys, seated on a makeshift throne of carved wood, straightened. I have come for ships and gold. Provide them, and I will not trouble your city. Refuse, and I will take them. The dignitary's expression wavered, but he tried to maintain politeness. We are a city of commerce. We could, perhaps, reach an arrangement. But Yunkai does not simply give away its wealth. What will you offer in return? Daenerys glanced at the ranks of Unsullied, motionless behind her. I offer you your continued independence. If you must see what my soldiers can do, You need only ask. The dignitary exchanged nervous glances with his companions. He let out an uneasy chuckle. You have formidable forces, indeed. However, Yunkai's walls are strong, and we have skilled sellswords. A conflict would be costly for both sides. Daenerys drummed her fingers on the arm of her throne. She was in no mood for extended negotiation. Consider it well, she said. I will give you 3 days to decide if you will grant me the ships and gold I require. If not, I will lay siege to your city. Return to your masters. Convey my words. Go. The Yunkish party departed in a hurry, leaving a trail of dust. Daenerys felt that old, familiar flicker of uncertainty. She could sense she was teetering on the edge of an ugliness that might swallow her whole. But ambition won out. She needed more than 8,000 Unsullied to conquer Westeros. The Targaryen name alone wasn't enough to rally the entire realm to her side. If she had the resources of Yunkai and perhaps Meereen, she could sail across the narrow sea with not just an army, but a navy as well. During the days of negotiation, she sent scouts around the city to study the walls, the gates, any weaknesses. In response, the Yunkai tried to threaten her with shows of mercenary cavalry riding out in formation. But none of it matched the calm lethality of her Unsullied. They were unshakable, forming perfect lines under the hot sun, spears glinting. Daenerys stood before them, cloaked in a sense of purpose, though her heart pounded whenever she thought of how Krasny's was likely entertaining guests with her dragon at that very moment. She tried to push that guilt aside. When the final day arrived and the Yunkai still hadn't delivered the ships or the gold, Daenerys gave the order to attack. The siege was a short, brutal affair. The Unsullied advanced in tight ranks, scaling the walls with siege ladders. The Yunkish mercenaries fought fiercely but were poorly coordinated compared to the disciplined eunuchs. Within hours, the city's gates were opened from within, and Daenerys rode in on horseback, flanked by Ser Jorah and Barristan and Selmy. Fires raged in parts of the city. Panicked citizens hid behind barred doors. At the Grand Plaza, Yunkai's aristocrats knelt, some openly weeping, others stammering pleas for mercy. Daenerys studied them, feeling a hollow satisfaction. In the canon of her life, she might have freed the city's slaves, might have broken their chains as she had once dreamed. Instead, she said, I require your gold and your ships. Provide them and you may maintain your local rule. But do not question my authority. In a trice, they fetched chests of coin, jewels, and other valuables enough to fill dozens of wagons. A few of the city's lesser lords arrived with their personal fleets, rickety but serviceable ships. Daenerys planned to gather them at the harbor and outfit them for a crossing. Still, the question of the city's slaves pressed upon her. She witnessed men and women in rags, huddled in corners, fearful eyes begging for deliverance. Their owners scurried about, trying to hide them away from the Targaryen invader. Daenerys remembered the same terrified eyes in Astapor. She felt a pang. She thought of how easily she could declare them free. She had an army large enough to enforce it. But she also recalled Krasny's threat and the possibility that the other slave cities might unite against her if she declared open war on the institution of slavery. She was not yet strong enough to face them all. So Daenerys did nothing. She took her spoils, gold, ships, supplies, and left the aristocrats to rule as they always had. Soldiers in her retinue who expected a liberator found only a conqueror. But at that moment, Daenerys convinced herself it was the only choice. She had come too far to let the moral question derail her pursuit of the throne. Not all were content. On the night before Daenerys planned to depart Yunkai, some of the city's freedmen, former slaves who had purchased their own freedom or been granted it, tried to incite a riot. They marched through the streets, calling on Daenerys to liberate their brethren. The Yunkish masters retaliated brutally, sending armed men to quash the protest. Daenerys watched from the safety of the old palace's balcony, the flicker of torches illuminating blood in the streets. Missandei, standing beside her, said nothing, though tears brimmed in her eyes. In the end, the uprising failed. Slavers maintained their hold, and Daenerys ordered the Unsullied to remain aloof, intervening only if they threatened her new possessions. More people died. More chains rattled. Daenerys' stomach churned, but she forced herself to remain distant, telling herself that one day when she was on the Iron Throne, she would have the power to shape the world differently. For now, she had to be pragmatic. Or so she told herself. She spent a sleepless night pacing the corridors, haunted by the cries of the dying. In a hallway of cracked marble, she nearly collided with Ser Barristan, who gave her a look of quiet reproach. He bowed stiffly. Your Grace, do you remember what it was that made the small folk love your father in the early years? Daenerys's brows furrowed. My father was the Mad King. I recall little love for him. Barristan pursed his lips. True, but before his descent into madness, he was once seen as a savior who ended the devastation of a previous war. People remember such gestures of mercy. They remember justice. Daenerys's eyes narrowed. You think I'm failing them here, is that it? You think me no better than a slaver? Barristan lowered his gaze. I think you must tread carefully, Your Grace. Power can harden the heart. She snapped, Thank you for your counsel, Whitebeard. She turned on her heel and swept away, leaving him to stand alone in the dark corridor. His words rang in her ears. She tried to shut them out. In the morning, she led her forces and her spoils out of Yunkai. She marched north, deeper into the continent's heart. The slow wave of her passage left a city simmering with resentment and fear, for she had subdued them as easily as one might crush an insect underfoot. Though Daenerys gained new wealth and resources from Yunkai, her mind often drifted to Drogon, captured far to the south. She wondered if Krasny's had found ways to torment or condition the dragon. The thought ignited a deep rage in her, but she stifled it. She told herself that once she had an unassailable position, once her other 2 dragons were fully grown, once she had the fleets and allies she needed, she would return. She would reclaim her child and teach the slavers a lesson in fire and blood. But that day was not yet at hand. She arrived at Meereen's massive walls weeks later, with the desert behind her and her new ships anchored off a small coastal outpost. Meereen dwarfed both Astapor and Yunkai in size, ringed by towering pyramids and labyrinthine districts. Great bronze harpy statues perched on high walls, glaring down with silent menace. As she approached, the city's slaves peered from behind parapets, their expressions guarded. The masters displayed a cool confidence. Meereen was wealthier and mightier than its sister cities, with thicker walls and an experienced garrison. Still, Daenerys had her 8,000 Unsullied. Her small Khalasar, though not massive, was loyal enough. She also had mercenaries from Yunkai. Some had defected to her side in hopes of greater pay or glory. The question loomed, would she do to Meereen what she had done to Yunkai? She sent an emissary, Ser Jorah Mormont, to the gates. The Meereenese lords refused him entry. They returned his approach with scornful messages. We do not bend to foreign queens who arrive with stolen armies, one letter declared. The audacity stirred Daenerys's anger. She had grown used to men scoffing at her claim, but something about the phrase stolen armies grated her conscience. In a way, it was true. She had bought these men with blood money, had kept them enslaved for her own ambition. She weighed her options. Even with the Unsullied, a siege against Meereen would be more difficult than Yunkai. The city had deep granaries, strong gates, a large fighting force. But she could not simply turn away, or else she looked weak. If she tried to parley, perhaps they would mock her again. At last, she decided on another tactic, infiltration. She recalled hearing that Meereen's sewers offered a way inside the walls for small teams. If she could smuggle a detachment of Unsullied into the city under cover of darkness, they might open the gates from within, similar to Yunkai, but on a grander scale. As the day of action drew near, Daenerys strove to maintain her calm. She gathered Grey Worm and a select group of trusted commanders in her tent. She explained the plan. They would slip inside the city's drainage tunnels, navigate the sewers, emerge near the central plaza, and open the main gates. Once the gates were open, the full might of the Unsullied would pour in. When she finished outlining the operation, Grey Worm stood at attention. My queen, I volunteer to lead the infiltration. My men will not fail you. She regarded high. With a solemn nod. Choose carefully who you take. It'll be dangerous. If it goes wrong. It will not, he said firmly. That night, under a moonless sky, Grey Worm and a cadre of Unsullied slipped into the sewers. Daenerys waited outside the walls with the bulk of her forces, the tension nearly unbearable. Hours seemed to crawl, each moment stretching like taffy. She listened for alarms, catapults, the hue and cry of the city. But all remained still, the darkness thick around her, the faint glow of lanterns upon Meereen's walls. Suddenly, a muted shout echoed from within. Then another. She heard the clatter of metal, faint but distinct. Her heart pounded. Was that a sign of success or failure? She was on the verge of sending another team to investigate when, at last, the main gates began to creak open. Torchlight spilled through the widening gap. Now! Daenerys shouted, spurring her horse forward. The Unsullied advanced with her, a tide of steel surging into the city's outskirts. Chaos erupted inside. The Meereenese guards scrambled, but they were taken by surprise, their ranks disordered. Unsullied spears thrust relentlessly. The memory of Astapor's demonstration returned to Daenerys. The precision, the brutality. She kept to the rear, letting her forces smash through the defenders. In less than an hour, Daenerys stood in Meereen's great plaza, its towering pyramids looming overhead. Bodies littered the streets, though many more Meereenese had fled or barricaded themselves inside. Grey Worm approached, blood splattered on his armor. He knelt, spear grounded in front of him. "The city is ours, my queen," he said. Daenerys nodded. She saw relief in his face, or perhaps she imagined it. "Well done," she said, but her voice felt distant. She glanced around at the wounded and dying. Another city had fallen to her, another step toward her throne. But at what cost? She advanced to Meereen's largest pyramid, where the city's rulers resided. The great bronze harpy perched above its apex. Along the way, she encountered throngs of slaves, men, women, children, who looked upon her with a mixture of hope and terror. Some reached out, calling for a savior, calling her Mysa, a name she remembered from another timeline, another choice, but which now felt as if it belonged to someone else entirely. Once inside the pyramid, she found the group of Meereenese masters huddled in a grand hall. They were trembling, guarded by Unsullied with spears at their throats. One of the lords, an older man draped in a heavily embroidered robe, stepped forward with surprising bravado. "You have spilled blood in our streets. Yet do you think you can hold Meereen? Our people will rise against you. The other cities will unite against you." Daenerys' eyes flashed. "Yunkai has yielded to me, and Astapor's unsullied march under my banner. What hope do you have?" She paused, letting the echoes settle. "Now you will surrender your treasures, your fleets, and your allegiance. If you defy me, I will show no mercy." She expected them to quake. Instead, the older man barked a bitter laugh. "You are just another tyrant," he said. "How many times have we kneeled to tyrants who cared nothing for our ways? Very well, we kneel. But if you believe we will ever love you, you are fooling yourself." The words stung. Daenerys realized she had once yearned to be loved by the people she liberated, but she had renounced that path. She had chosen a pragmatic route, forging ahead without toppling slavery's entire edifice. Now she had to accept the consequences. "You will obey me," she said quietly. "Love is not required." With Meereen subdued, Daenerys faced the next step, establishing her rule, collecting the resources she came for, and continuing on her journey. But Meereen was no mere outpost like Yunkai. It was a grand city, the jewel of Slavers Bay. Governing it, even for a short while, required a delicate balance. She installed a provisional council of local nobles who pledged loyalty under the watch of her Unsullied. She required shipments of grain and coin to supply her future campaign. She placed a garrison in strategic points around the city. Once again, she encountered the pleas of slaves begging for liberation. Some prayed to her as a goddess, hearing rumors that she could not be burned by fire. Others looked at her warily, uncertain if she was simply another master. The city teetered on the edge of rebellion and hope. Daenerys felt that tension closing in around her like a vice. One evening, her small council gathered in the pyramid's throne room, an opulent chamber with mosaics of harpies and dancers across the walls. Ser Jorah spoke first. "You've gained enough ships, your grace, to transport a significant force across the narrow sea. If we sail soon, we might avoid the storms of autumn." Ser Barristan nodded, though his brow was knit in concern. "There is wisdom in leaving quickly. The longer we remain, the more we risk entanglement in local disputes." Daenerys sat on the marble throne, arms resting on the harpy-shaped armrests. She stared at the mosaic floor, slaves carrying palanquins for robed masters. "Yes," she murmured. "We have what we came for." The Sandai was quiet, but Daenerys sensed her gentle gaze. She turned to the free woman. "Speak your mind. You have permission." Missandei swallowed. "My queen, the slaves here, they thought you might break their chains. Rumors said that Daenerys Stormborn frees those in bondage. But now you do not." A hush fell across the throne room. Daenerys's breath grew shallow. She remembered another version of events, one in which she had, in fact, broken chains. She recalled how that story had spread like wildfire, how it had led to her being called Breaker of Chains. But in this reality, she had chosen not to free the Unsullied. She had not toppled Yunkai's slave system. She had come to Meereen and seized it for her own ends without a grand emancipation. The name Misa felt more ghostly than ever. She looked at Yora, who maintained a neutral expression, though she sensed he was uneasy. She looked at Barristan, whose eyes flicked downward. Then she looked at Missandei, whose entire being radiated a quiet longing for justice. At last, Daenerys said, "I understand their hopes, but I cannot fight every battle at once. If I remain here, if I spend my strength liberating an entire city, I will bleed my resources dry. And what then of Westeros? My rightful throne?" She closed her eyes briefly, summoning the steel in her voice. "Once I am queen of the 7 kingdoms, once my dragons are grown, I will have the power to make true change everywhere. But I cannot do it now. I am sorry." Missandei bowed her head. "Yes, my queen," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ser Yora cleared his throat, sensing the tension. "Then we must prepare to depart. Meereen's masters will be left to handle their city as they see fit, under threat of your return if they displease you. I expect the region will remain uneasy, but, as you said, we cannot fight on 2 fronts." Daenerys nodded. She rose from the throne, letting her gaze sweep across the chamber. She could almost taste the swirling resentment from the slaves who yearned for liberation, from the masters who hated her intrusion, from her own advisors who silently judged her choices. But she pushed it all aside. She had come too far to turn back. Over the next few days, the Targaryen host collected the promised ships in Meereen's harbor, loading them with provisions and the spoils taken from Yunkai and from Meereen's coffers. She left behind a small garrison of Unsullied to secure the city in her name, though she doubted the arrangement would last long once she was gone. She also appointed a puppet governor, one of the lesser nobles who seemed more tractable. With each decision, she felt a creeping hollowness. This was not how she once envisioned her grand crusade across Essos. But she told herself it was necessary. On the eve of departure, Daenerys climbed to the top of Meereen's tallest pyramid to watch the sunrise over the bay. The wind whipped her silver-gold hair around her face. The city stretched below, roused to a daily bustle. Even in the pre-dawn light, she could see pockets of unrest. Smoke drifted from burned-out buildings, a testament to the battle she had waged. She wondered how much of the city's daily life would remain overshadowed by fear. She heard a step behind her. It was Grey Worm, his face earnest as always. She nodded, acknowledging his presence. "You will sail with me," she said. "I need you, my commander." He bowed. "As you command, my queen." She turned to gaze east. For a moment, she considered the vastness of Essos, the uncertain path that lay ahead. She thought of returning to Astapor, of reclaiming Drogon from the vile hands of Krasnys. But even if she succeeded in that, she would still have only one grown dragon, if Drogon could truly be called grown yet. She ached to hold him again, to feel his warmth. The other 2 dragons, Regal and Viserion, traveled with her, but they were smaller than Drogon had been. Their growth was slow. She had left them partly caged, worried about losing them the way she had lost Drogon. Everything felt precarious, half-formed. Finally, she tore her eyes from the horizon. "Come," she said to Grey Worm. "We have a fleet to board." By midday, the Targaryen army had embarked. Dozens of ships, many battered and patched with fresh timbers, hoisted black sails emblazoned with the sigil of House Targaryen, the 3-headed dragon. Daenerys stood on the deck of the lead ship, flanked by Yora and Barristan, watching as Meereen's skyline receded into the distance. She felt a swirl of emotions she could barely name. Relief? Regret? Determination? All churned together in a great unsettled tide. "West," she commanded the ship's captain. "Set sail for Westeros. It is time." The helmsman steered them toward the open sea. Winds rippled the sails. Daenerys inhaled the brine-tinged air, remembering stories of Aegon the Conqueror's voyage to Westeros so many centuries ago. She was on the cusp of her own conquest. She had wealth, ships, and army. But she had traded away so many pieces of her soul in the process. As the shoreline of Slavers Bay dwindled behind her, she tried not to picture the slaves still in chains, tried not to imagine Drogon's pained roars echoing through Astapor's streets. She clung to a single thought: once she had the Iron Throne, once the 7 kingdoms were hers, she would return. She would free Drogon. She would free the Unsullied from their chains. She would free all the slaves of Slavers Bay. She would undo the harm she had caused. Yet a small voice inside her asked, "Will I still want to?" Those doubts lingered as the fleet cut through the waves. Days slipped into weeks at sea. They passed merchant vessels, small islands, storms that battered the decks. Through it all, the Unsullied remained stoic. Daenerys took occasional solace in speaking to Regal and Viserion who were confined to the ship's cargo hold during turbulent weather. She fed them scraps of meat, cooing softly in Valyrian. They nuzzled her, uncertain. She felt their warmth and tried not to think of the child she'd left behind. Sometimes she walked among the Unsullied on deck, watching them clean their arms or stand guard. Their silent presence was both comfort and curse, loyalty beyond question, but lacking any sense of personal spark. She recalled how once, in another telling of the story, she had freed them. They had chosen to follow her out of gratitude and hope. But in this reality, she had never tested the strength of that bond. She had chosen to rule them as property, though a kinder master than Astapor's perhaps, but a master all the same. When she gazed upon them now, she wondered if they looked at her with admiration or simply the numb acceptance of a slave. At times, she imagined a silent rebuke in their eyes. Eventually, they entered the narrow sea, skirting the coast of Dorne. Daenerys took heart in the sight of Westeros at last. Hills of pale green rose from the shoreline, the sun glinting on distant rocky cliffs. She was coming home, if it could be called home, for she had never truly set foot there. But House Targaryen was of Westeros, and she believed that some piece of her soul belonged on that soil. Perhaps in the land of her ancestors she might find redemption for the choices she had made. They made landfall near the southeastern coast of Dorne, a deserted stretch of beach. Daenerys disembarked first, stepping onto the sand with trembling legs. The dryness of the air was different from Essos. The sun was fierce but had a crisp edge to it that spoke of autumn's approach. She dug her fingers into the grains of sand, letting a surge of pride swell in her chest. At last, she was here. Her banners were raised along the shore. The Unsullied formed ranks on the beach, spears held high. From a vantage atop a dune, Daenerys watched as one by one, her ships anchored, unloading men and supplies. It was a spectacle that might have impressed any local scouts if they were watching, a foreign queen arriving with an army at her back. But her arrival was no triumph of a beloved liberator. It was a claim staked by might. Ser Jorah approached, brushing sand from his cloak. "We'll need to secure alliances quickly, Your Grace. The Lords of Dorne might be your best prospect. They have a long history of animosity toward the Lannisters. If they rally to you, it could create a southern front." Daenerys nodded. "Yes. We shall approach the Dornish with caution, but we must approach them." She paused, gaze drifting over the Unsullied. "Set up the camp. Have them erect fortifications. We don't know how soon we might be challenged." Jorah bowed and began shouting orders. The beach hummed with activity as tents rose, supply wagons were hauled ashore, watch posts were established. Daenerys stood in the swirl of movement, feeling an odd sense of emptiness. She was so close to her goal, but it all felt strangely hollow. She had parted ways with the notion of being a heroic conqueror who freed the oppressed. Now she was a would-be monarch bringing war to Westeros. The iron taste of irony lingered in her mouth. She once believed her crusade in Essos would make her worthy of the Seven Kingdoms. Instead, she had taken a more ruthless path. Would her ancestors have approved? Would Rhaegar Targaryen, the brother she never knew, have admired this single-minded push for power? Or would he have mourned the kinder queen she might have been? Night fell on the Dornish shore, the skies glittering with unfamiliar constellations. The Unsullied patrolled the perimeter, disciplined shadows in the moonlight. Daenerys took a solitary walk along the water's edge, letting the waves lap at her boots. She thought of the future. She saw King's Landing in her mind's eye, the Red Keep in flames, the Lannister banners burning, the Iron Throne hers at last. She saw Ser Barristan placing a crown upon her head. She saw Jorah exultant at her side. She saw herself triumphant. And in a small corner of that vision she saw Drogon again, free of chains, roaring with renewed life. She paused, letting the surf swirl around her ankles. Perhaps, she told herself, once I am queen, I will journey back to Astapor, reclaim my child, and at last free the Unsullied, letting them choose whether to remain in my service or to go as they please. It was a comforting fantasy. But if there was one truth she had learned, it was that the path to power changed a person. Each sacrifice she made, each cruelty she permitted, weighed on her soul. When the time came, would she truly relinquish the weapons that had carried her to victory? Or would she rationalize more reasons to hold them close? A ripple of wind brushed her cheeks, carrying the faintest scent of spices from the campfires behind her. She lifted her head and gazed at the moonlit horizon. Somewhere out there, across leagues of black water, lay the ruins of her innocence. She could not turn back. She could only go forward, step by unwavering step, until all the thrones of men lay beneath her dragon's wings. That, she decided, was her fate. She listened to the ocean's murmur as if it whispered secrets of tomorrow. Then, with a final breath to steady her heart, Daenerys Targaryen turned from the shore and strode back toward the glow of torchlight where her army and her destiny awaited. If regrets lingered in her wake, she left them to be washed away by the unforgiving tide, for she was the mother of dragons, and in this tale she had chosen to pay any price to claim her birthright. Still, in the quiet hush of the stars overhead, the faint echo of chains rattled like a distant lament, as if to remind her that not all debts could be so easily forgotten. And though she hardened herself against that sound, some part of Daenerys knew that it would follow her like a shadow at dusk until the end of her days. Daenerys Targaryen felt the sting of the salt air on her cheeks and the distant burn of ambition in her veins as she made her way back to the hastily erected camp on the beach. The sands of Dorne whispered under her footsteps, the pale grains shifting in the moonlight. Her Unsullied stood guard in neat lines, spears upright, armor washed by the silver glow of the moon. More than 8,000 of them were here, still in the chains of her command, still unwavering in their obedience. The fleet she had gathered from Slavers' Bay rocked upon the waves just beyond, dark sails emblazoned with the three-headed dragon, the banner of House Targaryen. For a moment, the sight filled her with fierce pride. She had crossed the world to reclaim a land she had never truly known. Her father's throne called to her like a distant star, one whose glimmer she could no longer ignore. She made her way toward her tent, its flap drawn open, a brazier outside casting flickering light across the sand. Missandei stood within, waiting, hands folded before her. The young scribe met Daenerys's gaze, sympathy and a weary respect warred in her eyes. Daenerys's heart twisted. She recalled the conversation they had shared in Meereen when Missandei had pleaded the case for the slaves who believed that Daenerys of the House Targaryen would free them. That hope had been dashed. Daenerys had left Meereen under the control of local nobles, installed a small garrison of Unsullied to ensure compliance with her demands, and sailed away with the spoils she needed, gold and ships. She had chosen not to become the breaker of chains. Or rather, she had not allowed herself to become that figure yet. Each time Missandei looked at her, Daenerys imagined she saw a silent question in those large, soft eyes. Why? She wished she had an easy answer. Before Daenerys could say a word, a gust of wind lifted the tent's canvas walls, carrying in the taste of sea brine. She brushed sand from her boots and stepped inside. "Is everyone settled?" she asked quietly, loosing the ties of her riding leathers and shrugging off her cloak. Missandei gave a small bow. "As well as can be managed, Your Grace. The men have pitched tents at the perimeter. Your commanders have secured the perimeter with watchfires. Ser Jorah and Ser Barristan are meeting with some of your Dothraki blood riders to organize foraging expeditions at first light. Supplies are ample for now, but the men will need fresh water. There is a small stream 2 miles inland. We must hope no one contests our right to it." Daenerys nodded, her thoughts drifting over the memory of stepping onto Westerosi sand for the first time in her life. "We must be cautious," she said at last, letting her voice ring with the careful authority she had learned to wield. "I have no illusions that King's Landing will remain ignorant of our arrival for long. If the Lannisters have eyes in Dorne, they will soon know we are here, if they do not know already." Missandei inclined her head in agreement. "Yes, Your Grace." Daenerys perched on the edge of a makeshift bench, folding her hands in her lap. "We will try to parley with the Dornish if we can. Their prince, Doran Martell, once had reasons to resent the Lannisters. Perhaps that remains true, but we must proceed delicately." "Yes, Your Grace. Do you wish for me to pen a letter to Prince Doran?" "In the morning. Tonight, let us rest. It has been a long voyage." Missandei nodded again and excused herself, leaving Daenerys alone with a single oil lamp flickering on a small chest. She listened to the wind flap the tent fabric, to the rhythmic surge of the tide, and to the distant clank of Unsullied spear butts shifting in the sand. For a moment, she closed her eyes. The ghosts of her past flickered behind her lids. Khal Drogo, Viserys, Karth, Astapor. She remembered Drogon's roar as Krasny's Naklas hauled him away. The memory sent a white-hot bolt of grief through her. She had told herself repeatedly that trading him was necessary, that power demanded sacrifice, that she still had Rhaegal and Viserion, and that one day she would be strong enough to free him. Yet the hollow ache persisted, refusing to be soothed. She rose and went outside again, slipping past the brazier. The dunes rolled away, pale in the moon's soft glow, dotted with the silhouettes of her soldiers. The sky was a tapestry of stars. She lifted her gaze to them, wishing for guidance, finding only silent watchers in the night. At last, she made her way to a small corral where her 2 remaining dragons were kept, Regal and Viserion, smaller than Drogon had been. Their wings rustled when they sensed her presence. A few Unsullied stood watch at a distance, as the dragons had grown temperamental these past months. She stepped closer, hands extended in a calming gesture. Regal, green and bronze, hissed softly, the ridges along his spine vibrating. Viserion, pale cream and gold, snorted a small puff of smoke. Daenerys ran a hand over Viserion's scaled flank, feeling the tension beneath. She had tried to keep them from the same fate that befell Drogon, confining them at times so they would not fly away or turn aggressive, uncertain if local lords might try to kill or capture them. Yet she could see how it stunted them. The knowledge tore at her. The world called her the mother of dragons, but she often felt more like a jailer than a mother. "I will free you one day," she whispered in Valyrian, stroking Viserion's shoulder. "When I have the power to protect you, I promise." Viserion emitted a low rumble, neither trusting nor condemning. Daenerys stayed there for a while, letting their warmth press against her, letting their presence anchor her thoughts. Eventually, she withdrew, retreated into her tent, and tried to sleep. That night, her dreams were fitful. She saw flames engulfing a city of red brick, and Drogon screeching somewhere in the smoke. Morning dawned, pink and gold across the dunes. Daenerys emerged from her tent to find Ser Jorah Mormont waiting with a cup of watered wine. His face bore the lines of troubled reflection. "Khaleesi," he said, using the old Dothraki title out of habit. "We've scouted ahead. The local hamlets seem deserted. Perhaps the folk have fled deeper inland. There's no sign of a Dornish host nearby, though the riders we sent are certain they're being watched. Whether they are Prince Doran's men or local lords, we do not know." Daenerys took the cup and sipped. "We'll send word to Sunspear," she said. "Let Prince Doran know that Daenerys Targaryen has come seeking an alliance. If he welcomes us, we will ride north in peace. If he spurns us, I will have no choice but to take what I need. Dorne is known for its proud defiance, but they also have reason to despise the Lannisters." Jorah studied her. "Very well, my queen. I will dispatch a messenger at once." She met his gaze. He had been with her from nearly the beginning, advising, guiding, and at times betraying her, though she had chosen to forgive. She could read the uncertainty in his eyes. For all his devotion, he worried about the ramifications of her choices, about the fact that she had grown more ruthless than he might once have hoped. Part of her wanted to reassure him, to say she was still the same Daenerys, that her heart still yearned to break the chains of the oppressed. But she would not lie outright. She had chosen her path, and it was lined with steel and sacrifice. By noon, the messenger rode out, a parchment in hand detailing Daenerys' arrival and her request for audience. 2 days later, the rider returned, escorted by a small troop of Dornish cavalry with bright yellow cloaks. Their leader was a slender man with dark, gleaming eyes and a sun-scorched face. He introduced himself as Ser André Dalt, a retainer sworn to House Martell. He brought Prince Doran's reply, a letter sealed with the sun and spear sigil. Daenerys stood in the warm shade of her tent as Missandei read it aloud in the common tongue. Prince Doran wished to speak with her in private at the Water Gardens, a favored retreat near Sunspear. He offered no promise of alliance in his missive, only a polite, measured invitation. The courtesy of it hinted at Doran's reputation. Calm, thoughtful, careful to weigh every angle. Daenerys mulled over the message. "He wants me to come to him. Does he expect I will ride unguarded? Perhaps a trap. Or perhaps it is genuine hospitality." Ser Jorah's brow furrowed. Doran Martell is known to be cautious to the point of slowness. Yet he is not a man who lures guests to slaughter them in secret. Even Oberyn, his late brother, was known for direct confrontation rather than underhanded trickery. "Still, we must be wary." Daenerys set her jaw. "We will go. I cannot remain idle here on the coast forever. But I will not travel alone. I will bring an escort of Unsullied, no more than 100, to show I am not a fool but not an invading force at his doorstep." Ser Barristan, Ser Jorah, and Grey Worm shall accompany me as well. The rest of our army will remain camped here for the time being. So it was decided. The Dornish cavalry under Ser André Dalt led the way inland. The column of 100 Unsullied moved in eerie silence, the midday sun reflecting off their polished helms. Daenerys rode a pale silver mare, a cloak of Targaryen black draped over her shoulders. In truth, she yearned to ride in with the swirl of dragon wings overhead to show her power in full. But she did not trust the dragon's flight across unfamiliar territory, nor did she wish to provoke the Dornish with a spectacle of fire and shadow. Her path had become about calculation, about the measured application of fear and force. She felt the tension of that choice in her bones as they rode past fields of sand-colored shrubs and stunted trees. They soon came upon a dusty road that wound toward the water gardens. The architecture revealed itself in layers of terraced steps, fountains trickling with cool water, palm trees swaying in the breeze. A small retinue of palace guards with spears and gilded helms waited at the entrance. Daenerys dismounted and allowed the guards to approach, though the Unsullied formed a protective wedge around her. She could almost taste the wariness in the air as the Dornish and the Unsullied eyed one another, one side full of sinewy men with sun-kissed skin and curved spears, the other a phalanx of silent eunuchs in rigid formation. Inside, the water gardens were a marvel. Shaded walkways and columns surrounded a vast courtyard of marble pools. Children of Dornish nobility sometimes played there, splashing and giggling, though none were present today. The space felt hushed, expectant. Servants in pale robes hovered near the pillars. At the center of the courtyard sat Prince Doran Martell, reclined in a cushioned chair, dressed in robes of subtle gold and orange. He was a large man, not in height but in girth, with thinning hair that had once been black. His face bore lines of weariness and cunning, though he managed a courteous smile. Beside him stood a tall figure with a shaved head and sharp features, Hoda, the prince's loyal captain of guards, leaning on a massive long axe. Daenerys stepped forward, chin high, reminding herself that though she had never been to Westeros before, this was her birthright by blood. Prince Doran, she said, letting a regal note seep into her voice. I am Daenerys Targaryen, the unburnt mother of dragons. She omitted the rest of her titles. Breaker of chains, Khaleesi of the great grass sea, since the first was no longer quite true in spirit, and the second might mean little to these Dornish eyes. Prince Doran gestured languidly. Welcome, your grace. Dorne has awaited a Targaryen presence for many years. I see you have chosen to come at last. She studied him, uncertain if there was irony in his tone. He offered no immediate hostility, only a calm wariness. He beckoned to a servant, who began to pour a cool, honey-sweetened drink into cups. Will you sit with me? Prince Doran asked. We have much to discuss. Daenerys flicked a glance at Ser Barristan and Jorah, who both nodded subtly. She moved forward. The Unsullied remained standing at a respectful distance, though Grey Worm positioned himself near her side, watchful. She sat across from Prince Doran, the sound of trickling water and stirring palm fronds surrounding them. A faint scent of citrus drifted on the air. It pleases me, Doran continued, that you arrived with a minimal escort. Some might have marched an entire army to my gates. Daenerys accepted the cup of honeyed water offered by a silent page. I intend no offense to Dorne. I have come to claim the throne in King's Landing. I recall the history between House Martell and the Iron Throne, how Prince Rhaegar Targaryen wed Elia Martell, your sister. Her children were... She paused, letting the final words hang. She knew well the fate of Rhaegar's wife and children, murdered during the sack of King's Landing. The Lannisters had allowed that atrocity, reaping the subsequent reward of political power under Robert Baratheon. Prince Doran's dark eyes slid closed for a heartbeat. Then he nodded. You are well versed in tragedy, it seems. Indeed, my sister Elia died at the hands of men loyal to Tywin Lannister. Some might think that a reason for Dorne to rally behind a Targaryen. And yet, others might say that the Targaryen reign is what brought about her demise in the first place. Daenerys felt a stir of indignation. My father was ill, and the kingdom suffered for it. I had nothing to do with that war. I was but a babe in exile. She tempered her tone, remembering she needed this man's alliance. The Lannisters are the ones who hold the throne now, and their hold weakens. I have come to break it. Will you aid me, Prince Doran? He took a slow sip of his drink, eyes never leaving her face. "I wonder what kind of rule you would bring to Westeros, your grace. Word travels even across seas. Some say you have an army of slaves, the Unsullied, still in chains. Others say you once sought to free slaves in Essos, but then changed course. Which story is true? And which Daenerys Targaryen stands before me now?" A hush settled over the courtyard. Even the flowing water seemed subdued, as if the fountains listened for her reply. Daenerys felt her chest tighten. She sensed Ser Barristan behind her, shifting in discomfort. She chose her words carefully. "I have done what I must to secure my claim. The Unsullied are indebted to me, as I am to them. They are my strength against those who would see House Targaryen remain in exile forever." Prince Doran's gaze flicked to the row of Unsullied near the pillars, standing as still as statues. Then he looked back to her. A polite answer, yet not truly an answer. "Perhaps it does not matter. What matters is that you intend to dethrone the Lannisters. Dorne has little love for the Lannisters, nor for their Baratheon allies. But an alliance is no simple matter. I have my own realm to protect, and I have no wish to provoke a war that would spill Dornish blood for a distant queen." Daenerys tightened her lips. "You fear the Seven Kingdoms' retribution if you stand with me?" He shrugged. "I fear many things, but what I fear most is a reckless conflict that tears this land apart again. Dorne is not so easily conquered, nor are we so eager for open war without gain. You must show me that your cause is more than vengeance. Show me that you would be a queen worth following." A flicker of exasperation flared in Daenerys's chest. She forced it down. "If I fail, the Lannisters remain in power. Will you allow that injustice to stand?" The prince's expression was unreadable. "We shall see. For now, I am prepared to host you and your closest advisors as my guests in Sunspear, under my protection unharmed. There we might negotiate. I will permit a small company of your Unsullied to attend you, but the rest of your army must remain on the coast until we come to terms." She hesitated, glancing at Yora, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. The arrangement was better than she could have hoped for, given the Martell's rightful suspicion. "Very well," she said. "I accept. My men will remain by the sea. I will ride to Sunspear with those I trust." Prince Doran's smile, though thin, seemed genuine. "Then let us take the next step together." The meeting ended soon after, with no promises made beyond the courtesy of negotiation. Daenerys withdrew to her escort. Grey Worm looked to her for direction. His face was blank, as always, but she saw the subtle tension in his posture. She told him they would bring no more than 50 Unsullied to Sunspear, and he would command them, ensuring her protection. The rest would return to the main force on the shore. Grey Worm bowed, obeying without question. A day later, Daenerys rode forth from the water gardens alongside Prince Doran's litter. The road wound through rolling desert hills, dotted with cacti and hardy scrub. Sunspear rose on the horizon like a beacon, its tall spear-like tower visible for miles. The city's walls were of pale stone, gleaming under the relentless sun. Banners bearing the Martell sigil, sun pierced by a spear, fluttered in the hot breeze. Along the roads, curious onlookers turned their heads to watch this strange procession. The elderly prince in his litter, the silver-haired Targaryen queen, and a phalanx of silent, helmed eunuchs. Inside Sunspear's walls, narrow streets bustled with Dornish folk, their skin tones varying from olive to deep brown, their clothes bright with color. Vendors hawked spiced wine and roasted peppers, pungent fragrances swirling in the air. Some citizens craned their necks to see Daenerys Targaryen pass by, whispering about her dragons, her foreign army, her claim to the Iron Throne. Others looked on with suspicion or outright dislike. She remembered the lines on Prince Doran's face and realized these were a people scarred by old wounds. If she was to gain their support, she needed more than acclaim. She needed them to believe in her, or at least believe they stood to gain by allying with her. Prince Doran led her into the great citadel of Sunspear, an array of towers and courtyards perched at the edge of the sea. Daenerys's Unsullied were quartered in one of the outer yards, where they pitched tents with methodical precision. Ser Barristan and Ser Jorah stayed close to Daenerys. Missandei, too, followed at her side, taking in the sights of Sunspear with quiet wariness. She had been enslaved in Essos, but never before had she seen the lands of Westeros. They were greeted by Dorne's court, a modest assembly of nobles in flowing silks, many wearing the fiery colors of House Martell. Among them were Ellaria Sand and several of Oberyn's daughters, the so-called Sand Snakes. Daenerys noted their sharp gazes, the hungry curiosity in their eyes. The story of Oberyn Martell's death at the hands of Gregor Clegane was well known. And while Ellaria and her daughters would prefer justice for that brutal loss, they might also look to Daenerys as a means to that end. No immediate hostility appeared. Prince Doran took Daenerys on a slow tour through the citadel, explaining how Sunspear had weathered the Targaryen invasions in the past, referencing the lore of House Martell that had once opposed dragons with cunning and desert knowledge. Daenerys sensed a subtle reminder in his words that Dorne could be a dangerous enemy if provoked. The grand halls were lined with tapestries of Dornish victories, the largest depicting Princess Meereen Martell, the yellow toad of Dorne, who resisted Aegon the Conqueror's armies. Daenerys forced a smile, acknowledging the pride of a people who had never been truly subjugated by Targaryen might. By evening, a modest feast was laid out in the citadel's lesser hall. Fresh fruits, pomegranates, melons, citrus adorned silver trays. Spiced meats and flatbreads perfumed the air. Dornish wine flowed in abundance, the sweet tang making Daenerys's head swim if she drank too quickly. She took a cup but sipped slowly. The hall was lit by torches that flickered orange across the stone walls, dancing over the faces of the gathered lords and ladies. Prince Doran presided over the meal from his cushioned seat, though Daenerys was placed at a position of honor beside him. As servants cleared the first course, Prince Doran turned to her. "You have come a long way, your grace. I would hear of your travels in Essos, of the conquests that brought you this far. Many speak of them. Some say you liberated cities, others that you left them in ruin. Which is it?" Daenerys placed her cup on the table, ignoring the glances from the nobles around them. "I took the cities of Slavers Bay, Astapor, Yunkai, and Meereen by force or negotiation. Each city swore loyalty to me, and from Astapor I gained the Unsullied." She hesitated, choosing her next words carefully. "There was a time when I considered freeing every slave in those cities, but circumstances changed. The cost of such a campaign would have bled my strength before I reached Westeros." The hall grew quieter as she spoke. She sensed the flicker of judgment in some gazes. A Targaryen queen who once espoused emancipation but now marched with slaves. Yet she also perceived a practical curiosity in others, particularly the Sand Snakes, who watched her with keen interest as if they evaluated her capacity for ruthlessness. "You stand by this decision?" Prince Doran asked softly. "Even though it means leaving men and women in chains?" Daenerys drew a slow breath. Her chest constricted as it did whenever that question surfaced. "I stand by what must be done if I am to win the Iron Throne. If I fail, my foes, Lannisters or otherwise, will not spare the innocent, nor will they trouble themselves with moral qualms. If I succeed, I can shape the realm as I see fit." Her words echoed through the hall, met mostly with silence. At last, Ellaria Sand spoke, her voice low and honeyed. "You speak of forging a new order once you sit upon the throne. But many before you have claimed they would bring change. Robert Baratheon promised justice after the Mad King's tyranny, and yet injustice thrived under his reign. Your own father called himself the scourge of the traitors, and we know what that meant. Why should Dorne trust another grand promise?" Daenerys's cheeks flushed. She felt the weight of their skepticism pressing against her. "What I promise is not a simple vow. My line was cast out, and the Lannisters have worn the crown in contempt of all that was done to my family. I am not blind to the sins of House Targaryen. I do not claim perfection. But I do claim the right to correct these wrongs and to create a realm where the innocent need not cower before a tyrant's whim." Ellaria's expression remained guarded. She glanced at her daughters, who sat further down the table. Tyene Sand, fair-haired and apparently mild, looked pensive, while Obara Sand, the eldest, seemed to watch Daenerys with an almost predatory interest. Before Ellaria could respond, Prince Doran interjected, "Injustice and tyranny are words easily spoken. The question is how you intend to bring about your new order. War will come if you press your claim. Are you prepared to see thousands of small folk die so that you might wear a crown?" Daenerys clenched her jaw. She remembered the atrocities of Astapor, the streets of Yunkai, the skirmishes in Meereen. She recalled the eyes of the enslaved who had pleaded for a liberator. This was the crux of her moral struggle: how many must die or remain in chains so she could gain the power to fix it all later. Was that truly any better than the tyrants she despised? But she was committed now. She forced herself to meet Doran's calm stare. I do not seek bloodshed, but if war is the only way to free the realm from Lannister rule, then war I shall wage. I would have Dorne as my ally in that fight, not an enemy. Prince Doran eased back in his seat, adjusting a gold-trimmed pillow beneath his elbow. You might not find open war so straightforward, Your Grace. The Lannisters still command alliances with the Tyrells of Highgarden, though rumor says the Tyrell Queen, Marjorie, wields her own intrigues at court. There are still Baratheon loyalists, Tully loyalists, and the North is in chaos with the Boltons installed in Winterfell. None of the 7 kingdoms are truly united. If you march, you will face a many-headed Hydra. Which is why I need the strength of Dorne, Daenerys insisted. Your armies, your vantage in the south. If we strike King's Landing from both land and sea, the Lannisters will crumble. Doran steepled his fingers. And if we take King's Landing, do you mean to punish all who served the Lannisters, or only the principal traitors? Justice is a complicated matter, Your Grace. I recall all too well how Tywin Lannister used the promise of clemency to lure enemies into traps. Would you do the same? Daenerys's voice turned soft. I do not wish to punish the innocent. The guilty, those who murdered children in the name of a false king, will face justice. But I will not be a butcher. Silence lingered. Then, to her mild surprise, Prince Doran nodded slowly. Your words are well chosen. You say you are not a butcher. But words alone are not enough to convince me. I propose a test of your sincerity. A hush fell across the high table. Ilaria Sand and the Sand Snakes leaned in. Ser Barristan tensed behind Daenerys, and Ser Jorah's hand inched toward his belt. Daenerys eyed Doran cautiously. What test? Doran's expression was solemn. There is a village on our western border, near the Broken Arm. It is small, unremarkable, but it has been suffering raids by a mercenary band who claim to fight for the Lannisters' gold. They harry the small folk, demanding tribute in the name of King Tommen. I have considered sending my knights, but these brigands scatter into the deep desert at the first sign of our banners. He paused, letting the gravity of his words settle. If you wish to prove yourself worthy of Dorne's trust, go there. Show me how you dispense justice. If your approach aligns with your promises, then Dorne may yet stand with you. Daenerys frowned, uncertain if this was a trap or a genuine challenge. You want me to hunt brigands to prove my worth? Doran shrugged, a faint smile curving his lips. Call it a chance to demonstrate your principles in action. It is a small matter, yet meaningful to those who suffer. If you find a way to protect my people without spilling needless blood, I will see it as a gesture of goodwill. If not, we shall see what that implies. Daenerys glanced at Ser Jorah, who shifted uneasily, but she sensed an opportunity in the prince's words. This could be a way to show that she was not the Dragon Queen who devoured everything in flame. Perhaps it would also buy her time to gauge the loyalty or skepticism of the Dornish. Very well, she said at length. I will ride west. Give me men who know the land, and I will see these so-called Lannister mercenaries subdued. Doran nodded. I will provide a guide, one of our rangers who knows the desert tracks. Take your Unsullied if you like. The band is said to number no more than a few dozen. But tread carefully. They hide in canyons and gullies, always ready to vanish. With that, the feast resumed, conversation turning to lighter topics. Wine, trade, local amusements. But Daenerys barely tasted the dishes placed before her. She felt a flicker of unease at the notion of being tested like an errant squire, but she swallowed her pride. She needed Dorne's support, and if slaying or dispersing a band of brigands would help, she would do it. She only hoped it would not devolve into needless cruelty. In the days that followed, she prepared for the journey west. She and her trusted companions made arrangements with Prince Doran, who provided a Dornish ranger named Valero, a lean man in plain leathers who claimed to have tracked the brigands' movements for weeks. The plan was to travel with a small force, 50 Unsullied, plus Ser Barristan, Ser Jorah, and Grey Worm, so as not to alarm the bandits into fleeing at once. A few of the Sand Snakes, Obara and Nymeria, volunteered to accompany them, though Prince Doran insisted they do so only as observers. He wanted to see how Daenerys would handle the situation without undue interference. Early one morning, Daenerys departed Sunspear. She rode a swift mare, the Dornish sun beating down on her shoulders. The road west was harsh and unpaved, winding past rocky outcrops and dry riverbeds. Patches of scrub dotted the landscape and the occasional cactus or twisted tree offered meager shade. The sky burned a fierce blue and dust clung to every surface. Still, the Unsullied marched with tireless discipline, carrying spears and small round shields. Obara Sand, wearing light leather armor, strode at the forefront, a spear balanced across her shoulders, while Nymeria Sand rode behind Daenerys, silent and thoughtful, her whip coiled at her hip. Valero the Ranger took the lead, guiding them toward the region near the Broken Arm. Over the course of 2 days, the desert vista gave way to rugged canyons. Wind-worn cliffs towered overhead, their stone faces striped in shades of russet and orange. Narrow passes twisted among the rock formations, creating a labyrinth that even the Unsullied would struggle to cross en masse. On the evening of the second day, Valero signaled for them to halt. He pointed toward a narrow defile in the distance. They camp there sometimes, he said quietly, nodding at a rocky gorge half-shrouded in the creeping dusk. The place is called the Cleft. If they are present, we might see their fires once night falls. Daenerys ordered the group to make a discreet camp behind a low rise. She posted a ring of Unsullied guards. No fires would be lit, only cold rations to preserve the element of surprise. She sat upon a rock, sipping water from a skin, scanning the horizon as the sky shifted from pale pink to deep purple. Obara Sand joined her, spear clutched in one calloused hand. The eldest Sand Snake had a blunt, forthright manner. She asked no permission before she spoke. "You mean to parley with these scum?" Obara said, voice tinged with skepticism. "If they truly fly Lannister banners, they deserve no quarter." Daenerys glanced at her, seeing a glimmer of Oberyn's fierce spirit in Obara's eyes. "Prince Doran asked that I deal with them without needless bloodshed. I will grant them a chance to surrender if they will." Obara laughed softly. "Mercy from a dragon. Let us hope they appreciate the gesture." Daenerys's lips thinned. She thought of the slaves in Yunkai, in Meereen, left in their chains. She remembered how she had once been called merciful when she freed the captives of the wine merchant who tried to poison her. But that seemed a lifetime ago, a simpler time when she clung to the moral clarity of a savior. Now, mercy felt like a luxury she could seldom afford. Still, if she was to show Dorne that she was not a butcher, she needed at least to attempt some form of leniency. Night descended, and as Valero predicted, a faint glow flickered against the canyon walls in the distance, the reflection of hidden fires. The brigands were there, unsuspecting. Daenerys consulted with Grey Worm and Ser Barristan, formulating a plan. At dawn, they would surround the gorge's exit points, then Daenerys would ride in with a small detachment to offer terms, lay down their arms and face judgment, or resist and be destroyed. When the first hints of sunrise crept over the horizon, they moved out. The Unsullied fanned across the high ground, silent and precise. Daenerys rode at the center, flanked by Yora and Barristan, with Obara and Nymeria following behind. The canyon walls rose steep on either side, a natural fortress. The approach was treacherous, loose rocks and rubble made the path narrow. Daenerys's heart thumped with anticipation. She had done this before, in a sense, commanding an ambush, cornering foes, but it never felt simple. A guard stood watch at the canyon's mouth, half drowsy from the night's chill. He jerked awake at the sight of approaching figures. Before he could cry out, Nymeria Sand flicked her whip, coiling it around his sword arm. Obara lunged with her spear, pressing the tip to his throat. He froze, eyes wide, trembling. Daenerys raised a hand, halting them. Obara shot her a glare, but obediently refrained from finishing the man. The Unsullied poured in, shields raised, spears bristling. Within moments, they had surrounded the small encampment. Roughly 24 men scrambled from bedrolls, cursing, hands grabbing at weapons. A scattering of tents, bedrolls, and a makeshift stable for a handful of horses indicated a bandit camp rather than a disciplined force. Yet Daenerys saw the gold and crimson lion sigil painted on a few battered shields. Whether these men were truly on the Lannister payroll or just using the name for their own intimidation, she could not say. The bandits, thoroughly surrounded by a wall of unsullied steel, began shouting among themselves, some brandishing swords. Their leader, a scarred man with a ragged blonde beard, stepped forward, scowling. "Who in the hells are you?" he demanded, glancing at Daenerys. Then he noticed the pale helms of the Unsullied, and something in his sneer wavered. "What is this?" Daenerys urged her mare forward. She kept her voice clear and commanding. "I am Daenerys Targaryen. You stand accused of raiding Dornish villages. Lay down your arms and you may live. Resist and you die." The man spat at the ground. "Targaryen? Don't make me laugh. The Targaryens are all dead, save for that scrawny boy across the sea." "You mean Viserys? Or Rhaegar's whelps? You're just some Sellsword whore, I'll wager." He stepped closer, ignoring the Unsullied's drawn spears, though his men shuffled uneasily at his back. Daenerys felt her temper flare, but she kept her composure. I have no desire to butcher you, but you have terrorized villages under the Lannister banner. Surrender and face the prince's justice in Dorne. A murmur rippled through the bandits. Some seemed inclined to talk. Others clenched their weapons, eyes darting. The scarred leader sneered. We're soldiers of the king, you foreign bitch. We take what we please, from whomever we please, by order of Casterly Rock. Or do you think your puny force of eunuchs can stop us? He jerked his chin at his men, trying to rally them. Obara Sand let out a bark of laughter, raising her spear high. You fool! Do you not see that you're surrounded by some of the finest warriors in Essos? You have no chance. The scarred man bared his teeth. I'll show you who has no chance. With a sudden roar, he swung his blade at an Unsullied soldier who deftly sidestepped, spear lashing out. The man parried, stumbling back. For an instant it seemed the brigands might break rank, but Grey Worm shouted in High Valyrian and a row of Unsullied advanced, spears leveled. Daenerys raised her voice again. Stand down. I'm giving you one last chance. Most of the bandits froze, intimidated by the sight of so many leveled spears. But the scarred leader lunged wildly, his sword cutting the air. Grey Worm caught the blow on his shield. Another Unsullied struck the man in the side with the wooden butt of a spear, sending him reeling. Enraged, he tried to slash at Grey Worm again, and Grey Worm responded with lethal efficiency, driving his spear through the man's throat. A gurgling sound escaped his lips as he collapsed, blood-staining the dust. The remaining bandits, seeing their leader fall, hesitated. A few still raised weapons, but it was half-hearted. Daenerys directed her horse forward, vantage high. Drop your blades, she commanded. Surrender now. One of the bandits, a younger man with a scruffy beard, let his sword clatter to the ground. Another followed suit. Soon, weapons thumped into the dust. A handful of them, perhaps 5 or 6, tried to flee toward a narrow crevice in the canyon wall. Obara Sand dashed after them. They scrambled up the rocks, but the sand snake hurled her spear with frightening accuracy, impaling one of the men through the back. The rest froze in terror. Unsullied rushed to intercept them, forcing them to their knees. In the aftermath, the canyon grew eerily silent except for the panting of men, the rustle of shifting feet. Daenerys surveyed the scene. A few bandits lay dead or wounded. The rest were disarmed, on their knees, heads bowed, outnumbered by the ring of Unsullied. Smoke from their doused campfires drifted in the morning light. She dismounted. Dust coated her boots as she walked among the kneeling captives. Their eyes were filled with fear, anger, or both. She spoke in a steady tone, letting each word carry. You are criminals who raided the people of Dorne, invoking the name of the Lannisters. For your crimes, you will be taken to Prince Doran Martell to face judgment. If he finds you innocent, you may go free. If guilty, you will face his justice. I will not butcher you here unless you give me cause. Some of the men glanced about furtively, perhaps considering a desperate escape, but the ring of Unsullied remained unbroken. A hush hung in the air as Daenerys looked to Grey Worm. Bind them, she said. Take their wounded for treatment if we can. Then we march back. Grey Worm snapped a salute. The Unsullied moved with swift precision, collecting ropes, shackling men's wrists, securing the horses, confiscating the bandits' meager loot. Obara Sand retrieved her spear from the fallen man, wiping the blood on his tunic. Nymeria watched Daenerys with an inscrutable expression. Ser Barristan approached, voice low. Your Grace, you showed them mercy. Let us hope Prince Doran sees that as honorable, not as weakness. Daenerys exhaled, seeing the blood soaking the rocky ground near the corpse of the scarred leader. If men call it weakness to spare those who surrender, so be it. I would rather show my nature here and let Doran judge me by it. She paused, remembering her conversation with Doran in the water gardens. Let us bring the prisoners back to him. He can do with them as he wills. The return journey was slower, weighed by captives and wounded. The midday sun scorched overhead. They carried waterskins, making sure no one died of thirst, though Daenerys's own mouth felt parched despite her sips. She wondered how the news of this would spread. Would the brigands claim they were tortured? Would they speak of her as the Dragon Queen who enslaved them, ignoring her attempt at mercy? She pressed on, reminding herself that Prince Doran had asked her to handle the matter. She had done so with minimal bloodshed, yet if he was searching for an excuse to deny her alliance, maybe none of it would matter. After 3 days of travel, They arrived at Sunspear, leading the bound bandits under the watchful eyes of Dornish guards. A small crowd gathered to watch. Mothers pulled children close, the onlookers whispering about the queen with silver-gold hair who had marched into the desert. The bandits looked bedraggled and angry, but not defiant. One spat curses at the onlookers until an Unsullied jabbed his spear but at the man's shoulder, silencing him. Inside the citadel's courtyard, Prince Doran awaited them. Ilaria Sand and two of the Sand Snakes, Tyene and Sarella, stood by. Obara and Nymeria stepped away from Daenerys's group, presumably to give their own private accounts to their prince. Daenerys ignored the sense of scrutiny bearing down on her. She ordered her Unsullied to line up the prisoners. Prince Doran examined them, expression grave. At a signal from Hoda, Dornish guards took custody, roughly hauling the men forward for questioning. A few cowered, sputtering pleas. Others glared in sullen silence. Doran heard their protestations calmly. Finally, he waved a hand, and the guards led them away, presumably to the dungeons. When all was done, Prince Doran turned to Daenerys. "You have brought them alive, as I asked. You used your strength but did not massacre them." He glanced at Obara, who nodded curtly. He turned back to Daenerys, eyes narrowed in thought. "Tell me, your grace, why spare them? They threatened you, insulted you, even. Many conquerors would have ended them on the spot." Daenerys met his gaze. "They are brigands, not an army. They had little choice but to raid or starve if they truly believed they served the Lannisters' gold. I do not delight in slaughter. I seek to prove that my rule need not be bathed in the blood of every foe." Doran studied her a moment longer. Then he nodded as if reaching a conclusion. "I see. Well, you have done Dorne a service. Those men will face trial, and if found guilty, which they almost certainly will be, they will hang. But their families, if they have any, will know we offered them a chance to surrender." He rolled his shoulders and a small smile crept onto his lips. "Consider this a first step in proving your intentions. Though it is but one step. The question remains, what sort of queen would you be for Dorne?" Daenerys inclined her head, understanding that this was both praise and a challenge. "One who keeps her oaths, Prince Doran. You have my word." That evening, a celebratory meal was held in Daenerys's honor, a lesser feast than before, but enough to mark the success of her mission. The tension in the hall felt marginally eased, though caution remained. Prince Doran offered a toast, acknowledging Daenerys's role in restoring peace to the western border. She raised her cup, forcing a polite smile. Yet she could not ignore the sense that many eyes still weighed her worth, still suspected she was no better than the conquerors who had come before. After the feast, Daenerys withdrew to a private suite provided for her in the citadel. Stone arches framed narrow windows overlooking the city rooftops and the shimmering sea beyond. The air was warm, but a soft breeze drifted through. Missandei helped Daenerys unlace her bodice, her fingers careful. They worked in silence until Daenerys spoke. In a subdued tone, "Do you think me a hypocrite, Missandei?" she asked quietly, turning to meet the younger woman's gaze. "I have shown mercy to these bandits, but I kept the Unsullied in chains. I left countless slaves still bound in Meereen in Yunkai." Missandei lowered her eyes, carefully folding Daenerys's garments. "I do not presume to judge my queen. I only know that Essos is far away now, and these men were right before you. Perhaps you wish to show the Dornish you can be merciful." Daenerys sank onto a cushioned bench, pressing her palms to her forehead. "Yes, but if that is the only reason, does it make me no better than those who kill or spare according to convenience?" Missandei hesitated, then spoke softly. "You are the queen, Daenerys Stormborn. You must weigh many things. Whether you are better or worse than others, that is not always clear, not even to yourself." Daenerys felt tears prick at her eyes but refused to shed them. She drew a breath, straightened her shoulders. "Thank you, Missandei. I value your counsel." Before Missandei could respond, there was a knock at the door. Ser Barristan entered, bowing stiffly. "Your Grace, Prince Doran requests a word with you in his solar." Daenerys rose, quickly smoothing her hair and donning a simple cloak over her loose linen shift. "Very well." She followed Barristan through the corridors where torches sputtered in wall sconces. Dornish guards stood at intervals, their expressions neutral. The castle's architecture was a blend of slender pillars and open-air balconies, the stone still warm to the touch from the day's sun. At last, they reached a small solar with a wide window overlooking the sea. Prince Doran sat on a low seat, a table of carved wood before him. An oil lamp cast soft light across his features. Hoda stood discreetly in the corner, stoic and silent. Doran beckoned for Daenerys to take a seat. "Leave us," he murmured to Barristan and Areo. They exchanged a glance but bowed and withdrew, leaving the prince and the queen alone. Daenerys folded her hands in her lap. The hush in the chamber felt thick. She could hear her own heartbeat. Dorne studied her for a moment as if weighing unseen scales. Then he spoke. "You have proven that you are not a mindless butcher. You subdued the brigands without unnecessary slaughter. That is admirable, but it does not yet reveal the full shape of your rule. There are rumors, your grace, swirling about what you did and did not do in Slavers Bay." Daenerys stiffened, suspecting what was coming. "Rumors often distort the truth." "Perhaps. But I have heard from travelers, from merchants, that you purchased the Unsullied with one of your dragons and that you never freed them. I have also heard how you left Meereen, Yunkai, and Astapor in the hands of those who continue to trade in flesh. Is that rumor?" She felt her jaw clench. "I saw that the cost of freeing them all would be too high. It might have left me broken and unable to press my claim in Westeros. I made choices that I believed necessary." Doran's gaze flickered, not with overt condemnation but with a quiet, probing intensity. "Necessary for whom? The thousands left behind in bondage? Or for yourself?" A tightness seized Daenerys' chest. She recalled the moment she handed Drogon's chain to Krasny's, the moment she rode away from Yunkai's tortured cries, the moment she boarded ships in Meereen with her cargo of gold and enslaved soldiers. Guilt flared within her, mingling with anger. "I did what I must," she repeated, voice taut. "The time was not right. If I wasted my strength there, I would never have come here. And then the Lannisters would rule unchallenged for years more." Prince Doran nodded slightly, as if acknowledging a chess move. "I understand the logic. It is not the logic of a saint. But perhaps we do not need saints. We need those who can steer the realm through chaos. Still, I wonder if you will remember the ones you abandon once you wear the crown. Or will you abandon all who cannot serve your ambition?" Daenerys' eyes flashed. "I abandoned no one lightly. Nor will I forget them. Once I have the throne, I will have the power to return to end slavery for good. I have not forsaken that dream. But a dream cannot be realized if I lose everything now." A silence stretched. The lamp flame flickered, casting shifting shadows on Doran's face. His voice, when he spoke, was subdued. "You sound as though you truly believe this path is the only way. Perhaps you are right. Who am I to judge the burdens of a conqueror?" "Very well, your grace. I will not press further. But I will ask you one last question. If you become queen of the Seven Kingdoms, what will you do for Dorne? We have lost too many of our children to the Iron Throne's intrigues. Will you treat us as mere subjects to be taxed and governed, or will you honor the bond we might forge here?" She tilted her chin up. "Dorne will be my ally and my partner. I will respect your traditions, your independence, as Aegon the Conqueror eventually did when he accepted Dorne's entry into the realm by marriage and treaty, not conquest. I do not seek to burn Dorne. I seek to join with it so that together we can overthrow the Lannisters and usher in a new era." Doran closed his eyes momentarily as though sifting her words. Then he drew a long breath. "Very well, Daenerys Targaryen. I will stand with you." Her heart skipped. "Truly?" He raised a hand. "With conditions. We will begin by forging a formal alliance. Dorne will provide you with men and resources. We will coordinate a strike against King's Landing when the time is ripe. In return, you will confirm the Martells as the lords of Dorne with wide latitude in our governance. Moreover, if you take the throne, you will remember that the men and women of Dorne are not to be trifled with as your father once did." Daenerys' relief mingled with caution. "I agree to those terms. With the might of Dorne behind me, I will move north, rally other houses who chafe under Lannister rule, and Doran gently waved his hand. "I said I would stand with you, but we must be patient. Rushing to King's Landing with only a Dornish host and your associate army might be unwise. The Tyrells are still sworn to the crown, at least officially, and the Crownlands are heavily garrisoned. The Lannisters remain formidable, especially with the gold of Casterly Rock behind them. We must seek alliances carefully. Perhaps you can parley with other disaffected lords. Perhaps the Iron Islands, now in turmoil, or the Vale under Lady Erin's regency. The Seven Kingdoms are fractious. We must exploit their divisions if we hope to prevail without being crushed by combined forces." Daenerys placed her hands on the table, leaning forward. She had never excelled at the Game of Thrones, the subtle maneuvering, the forging of alliances in a mosaic of feudal politics. But she had no choice now. "Then I will do as you advise," she said. "Help me reach out to those who might join me. I trust you know which houses share your grievances." Prince Doran offered a wry smile. "I will do what I can. But your presence is what will truly sway them. A Targaryen returning at the head of an army, some will fear you, some will revere you. I can guide you to the right lords, but how you persuade them is your task. We shall orchestrate letters, discreet meetings, talk of old alliances. Meanwhile, your Unsullied remain along Dorne's coast, yes. Yes. It may be wise to keep them there, so as not to alarm all of Westeros at once. Let the realm whisper of the Targaryen queen in Dorne, uncertain of your strength. Then strike with overwhelming force when the time comes. Daenerys nodded, though a flicker of doubt ran through her. She was not used to such cautious steps. She had taken cities in Slaver's Bay through direct action, surprising her foes. Yet here, the scale was larger, the stakes higher. She forced herself to accept Doran's counsel. Agreed. They spoke for a while longer, discussing logistics and messages to be sent. Eventually, Daenerys withdrew, her mind whirling with plans. She felt both triumph and trepidation. Dorne was hers, tentatively, and with it a foothold in Westeros. She had at last found a great house willing to stand by her side, at least so long as she met their conditions. 2 days later, a formal announcement was made in Sunspear's main courtyard. House Martell recognized Daenerys Targaryen's claim to the Iron Throne and would support her cause. A wave of rumors spread through the city. Some cheered, particularly those who still held bitterness for the Lannisters' past crimes. Others muttered that Dorne was plunging into another war that might devastate them. Yet the official stance was set, and Dorne's banners would soon join Daenerys's in open defiance of King Tommen Baratheon. Though Prince Doran stressed the need for secrecy in the initial phases. With this newfound alliance came new complexities. Daenerys sat at the head of a large table in a hastily arranged war room within the citadel. Maps of Westeros lay strewn across, inked with lines and symbols to mark roads, strongholds, rumored troop movements. Prince Doran, Illyria Sand, and several Dornish lords conferred with Ser Jorah, Ser Barristan, and Missandei. Oberyn's daughters drifted in and out, each with her own agenda. Some seemed eager for revenge against the Lannisters. Others viewed Daenerys with curiosity or even quiet admiration. They discussed forging ties with the Stormlands, which had grown restless under Lannister-backed rule. They debated whether the Vale, ruled by the unstable Lysa Arryn and her son, could be swayed. They pondered the North, which was rumored to be under the cruel grip of Ramsay Bolton, while the scattered remains of House Stark's supporters lingered in hidden pockets. Each region posed a distinct challenge. At last, they decided to reach out first to House Tyrell, ironically the Lannisters' strongest ally. The Tyrells had influence, wealth, and a vested interest in controlling the throne through Queen Margaery. But if rumor was correct, the Lannisters' hold on King Tommen was slipping, and tensions existed between Margaery and Cersei Lannister. A potential opportunity lay there if Daenerys could convince the Tyrells that supporting a Targaryen restoration served them better than a losing alliance with the Lions of Casterly Rock. So Missandei composed a carefully worded letter in the name of Daenerys Targaryen, extending an offer of parley to Olenna Tyrell, the Queen of Thorns, famed for her cunning. The letter promised no immediate hostilities if the Tyrells would consider a meeting to discuss the future. They sealed it with the three-headed dragon sigil. Doran arranged for discreet couriers who could bypass Lannister spies. Meanwhile, Daenerys took it upon herself to strengthen ties within Dorne. She visited the water gardens again, meeting the children of various Dornish lords and ladies. She walked through the marketplace of Sunspear, accompanied by Grey Worm and several Unsullied, letting the people see her face. Some were awed, some suspicious. Yet no one openly jeered or attacked her, for she was now under Martell protection, and the sight of her immaculate guard, a living testament to her power, made all but the bravest step aside. Still, she knew time was not her ally. The Lannisters might soon hear of her presence. She pictured Cersei's furious machinations or Tywin Lannister's cold calculations, though Tywin was rumored to be dead in this timeline, leaving Cersei and her allies to run the show. Word would spread, tongues would wag. If the crown decided to crush this new Targaryen threat before she gathered more strength, an army could descend upon Dorne from the Red Mountains. Daenerys had to prepare her forces, uncertain if an attack might come at any moment. She and Jorah made frequent trips back to the coastal camp, checking the readiness of her 8,000 Unsullied. She found them much as she had left them, stoic, unwavering, drilled to perfection. She wondered if they had any opinions on being in Westeros, so far from the land of their birth, but none voiced it. They belonged to her by bond or by chain. She hardly knew which anymore. Grey Worm showed her the new fortifications they had raised. Ditches, sharpened stakes, watchtowers of wood. If the Lannisters tried to land a force along the Dornish coast, they would find a well-defended camp. In quieter moments, Daenerys visited Regal and Viserion, who dwelled in a makeshift pen near the beach. The dragons had grown somewhat since their time in Meereen, wings wider, teeth sharper. They snapped and hissed, craving freer skies. She let them fly short distances over the water when the winds were calm, but always with careful watchers in small boats, lest they vanish or be ambushed. The memory of Drogon's capture still haunted her. The day she traded him away in Astapor cut into her soul like a dull knife. Even now, she dreamed sometimes of hearing his angry roars echo across the sea. On one such visit, as she stood on the beach watching Regal circle overhead, Ser Barristan approached, frowning at the spectacle of the large green bronze shape slicing through the sky. "Your Grace," he said in a low voice, "I once served your father and your brother Rhaegar, but I ask you something now as a friend. Do you truly believe you will be able to free Drogon once you sit the Iron Throne?" Daenerys swallowed, eyes tracking her dragon's flight. "I have to believe it. Drogon is my child, just as these two are." Barristan sighed. "I witnessed how your father's single-minded pursuit of his desires brought ruin to the realm. I do not say you are the same, but ambition can blind us. If the day comes that you must choose between your throne and freeing Drogon, which will you choose?" Her chest tightened. She recalled the day she lost him, the day she took the Unsullied and never looked back. "I will find a way to do both," she said firmly, though the words felt fragile. Barristan looked pained but said nothing further. Time slid onward. Ravens came and went between Sunspear and other corners of Westeros. Doran received messages from spies in King's Landing, whispering that Cersei Lannister was indeed hearing rumors of Daenerys' presence in Dorne. The Crown had responded by bolstering the garrisons in the Stormlands and dispatching envoys to the Tyrells, urging them to remain loyal. Meanwhile, no direct reply came from Olenna Tyrell, leaving Daenerys to wonder if her letter had even reached the fabled Queen of Thorns. A hush of tension gripped Sunspear. Daenerys felt it, a coiling readiness for the next move in this great game. She spent hours with Prince Doran discussing strategies and forging bonds with Dornish lords who swore they would raise their levies when the time came. Obara Sand sparred with Grey Worm in the training yard, each testing the other's skill. Nymeria Sand followed Daenerys like a silent shadow, occasionally asking pointed questions about Essos, about battles fought. Tyene Sand, with her sweet face and gentle voice, seemed the most outwardly friendly to Daenerys, but there was an undercurrent of cunning in her words. Even the younger daughters, Sarella, Elia, Obella, hovered at the edges of court, analyzing this Targaryen queen. Then, at last, a raven arrived bearing the Tyrell seal. Doran summoned Daenerys to his solar again, excitement flickering in his usually measured face. Missandei translated the letter's contents aloud in a breathless hush. Lady Olenna Tyrell proposed a secret meeting on the southern borders of the Reach in an abandoned keep known as Horn Hill. The keep once belonged to House Tarly, but that house had marched north under the Lannisters' summons, leaving it lightly defended. Olenna would arrive with a small retinue, expecting Daenerys to do the same. The letter strongly hinted that Highgarden might be willing to consider an alliance if the terms were favorable and if certain issues could be addressed. Olenna did not elaborate, but Daenerys suspected those issues included the question of who would sit on the throne if Tommen were displaced and how the Tyrells might maintain influence. Daenerys weighed the risks. A meeting in a deserted stronghold could be a trap. Yet if it was genuine, forging an alliance with the Tyrells could shift the entire balance of power in Westeros. Prince Doran's gaze gleamed. If the Tyrells break with the Lannisters and come to your side, King's Landing could fall swiftly. The Crown cannot withstand a two-front war, Dornish forces pressing from the south, the Tyrell armies advancing from the west and taking the capital's supply lines. King's Landing would starve or surrender. She nodded slowly. "Then I will go. But I will not go unprepared." Doran agreed. Plans were laid to travel overland to Hornhill. The journey would be long, crossing the steep passes of the Red Mountains and descending into the northern edge of the Reach. Daenerys would bring a detachment of Unsullied, perhaps 200 men, enough for protection, not enough to be seen as a threat to the Tyrells. Yora, Barristan, and Missandei would accompany her, as always. Prince Doran would remain in Sunspear to coordinate with the Dornish lords, but he volunteered Obara and Nymeria Sand to join her as representatives, partly to observe, partly to protect. Soon, a lean but determined column set out from Sunspear at dawn. Daenerys rode at the head, the Dornish sun already fierce on her shoulders. They pressed westward into the Red Mountains. The terrain grew rugged, the air cooler at higher elevations. Narrow passes forced them into single-file lines, with scouts ranging ahead. On these winding roads, a small force was vulnerable to ambush, but no attack materialized. Perhaps the Lannisters' network was less extensive here, or perhaps luck favored them for the moment. Days bled into nights on the mountain trails. The pace was grueling, but Daenerys kept her eyes fixed on the horizon, spurred by the possibility of an alliance that could bring her a giant step closer to the throne. She thought of the Iron Throne often, imagining herself seated upon it, the heads of traitors bowed before her. She pictured the day she would sail back to Slaver's Bay with an overwhelming Westerosi host, free Drogon, and end the vile trade that had stolen so many lives. A single vision burned in her mind, fueling each weary day's journey. A world reshaped by her will, made better, somehow. She clung to that hope. Finally, they descended from the mountains into the rolling green foothills of the Reach. The contrast with Dorne was striking. The land was lush, dotted with vineyards and orchards. Streams meandered between gentle slopes. The air smelled of hay and blossoms rather than dust and spice. In the distance, the silhouette of a small fortress loomed on a rise. A stout keep with a wooden palisade, half overgrown with ivy. Their scouts returned, reporting that the keep, Horn Hill, appeared lightly guarded by fewer than a dozen men. No banners flew. A few tents pitched on the grounds suggested a visiting party had arrived. Cautiously, Daenerys led her force forward. The gate stood open, a single guard stepping forward with a raised hand. He wore no sigil, only plain mail. "You are expected," he said. "Enter peacefully, and no blood need be spilled." Daenerys exchanged a glance with Yora, who had a hand resting on his sword hilt. She nodded and they passed within. The courtyard was weedy, the stones cracked, as though it had not seen maintenance in months. A cluster of horses stood tethered near a stable. At the keep's entrance, a stout old woman in a green gown trimmed with gold-weighted, leaning on a cane. Her silver hair was arranged in a cunning swirl. A pair of attendants flanked her, holding baskets of something or other. Lady Olenna Tyrell raised her cane as Daenerys dismounted, eyes sharp as a hawk's. "So, the Dragon Queen arrives at last," she said, her voice quavering only slightly with age. "Let's not waste time with pleasantries. Follow me inside, if you please, so we may speak without the entire countryside eavesdropping." Daenerys found herself surprisingly amused by the old woman's brusque manner. She signaled for most of her escort to remain in the courtyard. Grey Worm, Yora, Barristan, Obara, Nymeria, and Missandei followed her inside, stepping into a dusty hall with threadbare tapestries on the walls. Olenna sank onto a creaking chair and gestured for Daenerys to do likewise on a bench opposite. "Well then," Olenna said, tapping her cane on the floor. "Let me look at you. Daenerys Targaryen, they call you. You certainly have the hair for it. And you have an army of eunuchs, I hear, though not enough for a full-scale war. And now you've allied with Dorne. Spare me the expositions, I keep my ear to the ground." She sniffed, turning her piercing gaze on Daenerys's companions. "Barristan the Bold, still alive? How quaint. You're Mormont, exiled from the north, if I recall correctly. And who are these charming ladies with spears? Snakes, I presume." Nymeria Sand offered a thin smile while Obara bristled. But Daenerys interjected gently, "They are daughters of Oberyn Martell. Fierce warriors, each in her own right." Olenna waved a dismissive hand. Yes, I know who they are. Let us speak plainly. I haven't risked my life by coming here to trade pleasantries. If we are to talk alliance, I need to know what you offer House Tyrell and why I should not simply call the Lannisters and deliver your head on a platter if it means favor at court." Daenerys studied the old woman. She sensed formidable intellect behind those wrinkled features. "You could do that, yes," Daenerys said calmly. "But House Tyrell is allied to the crown through Queen Margaery. And from what I hear, that alliance is strained. Cersei Lannister despises your granddaughter. The faith militant was revived in King's Landing, leading to humiliations for Margaery and Loras if rumors are true. Do you truly trust that the Lannisters will not turn on you at the first opportunity?" Olenna's eyes narrowed. "You come armed with gossip, I see. Clever. But my granddaughter is still queen, and her hold is not easily shaken. Tommen is a malleable boy, or so they say. Another child king, gods preserve us. I might yet steer the realm through him. Daenerys allowed herself a wry smile. Or you might find that the Lannisters' hold on King Tommen is stronger than it appears. Cersei is cunning and she has the crown's resources unless they run out of gold. Then she will likely try to marry Tommen off again or some such scheme to maintain their power. Where does that leave House Tyrell? Olenna sniffed. Spare me the speculation. What do you propose? I propose that you side with me. Help me take King's Landing, place me on the throne, and in return, House Tyrell will maintain its lands, its titles, and likely grow in influence under a new Targaryen reign. I will not forget those who aided me in my hour of need. The old woman was silent for a moment, tapping her cane on the floor, eyes keen. Such ambition. And what, pray tell, will you do if I refuse? Attack Highgarden with your Dornish allies? Could you even manage that? Daenerys met her gaze unflinching. You know how swiftly I took cities in Essos. My Unsullied are unmatched in discipline. And Dorne is not easily cowed by outside forces. If you stand with the Lannisters, you will face us and the blood spilled will be immeasurable. I would rather avoid that. So would you. Olenna's expression hardened, but she nodded slightly as though conceding a point. I am no friend to Cersei Lannister. And Mace, my son, the Lord of Highgarden, blusters about wanting to remain loyal to the crown, but he always follows my counsel. The question is whether your claim is worth the risk. My dear Marjorie is a beloved queen by the small folks' measure, but that love might sour if bread prices rise or armies clash. Nymeria Sand spoke up, voice cool. If you remain with the Lannisters, the people of the Reach will eventually face the wrath of dragons once Daenerys' forces are gathered. Is that the future you want? Olenna turned a sharp eye on Nymeria. Dragons, you say? Bah! I see no dragons here, only a half-grown girl and her half-grown army. Daenerys took a breath, controlling the sting of that remark. I have 2 dragons waiting on the Dornish coast. They are not large enough to conquer the 7 kingdoms alone, but they grow every day. And once I have the throne, I will have the resources to raise them to their full might. Meanwhile, the Lannisters have no dragons, nor do they have the goodwill of many lords. They rely on fear and gold. That gold is dwindling if the rumors of the Iron Bank's displeasure are true. Lady Olenna's lips pursed in thought. There's truth in that. The crown's coffers are near empty. The Lannisters themselves have their gold mines, but even those, oh, never mind. The real question is how this war would end. If you take the throne, will the people starve? Will King's Landing burn as it did under your father? Daenerys felt a flash of anger. I am not my father. I do not wish to be the Queen of Ashes. And yet, Olenna said slyly, you have an army of slaves you never freed. You traded a dragon for them. One wonders how far you might go if pressed. Daenerys' nails dug into her palms. Enough of this. You either sense the tide turning, or you do not. The Tyrells can remain with the Lannisters and watch the realm tear itself apart. Or you can stand with me and shape its future. Olenna studied her a moment longer, then gave a slow, curt nod. Very well, I did not come here to turn you away. Let us say we do join you. We would need to orchestrate matters carefully, so the Lannisters do not suspect until it is too late. The Tyrell banners are vast. We can raise armies from Highgarden, the Arbor, and 100 smaller houses. If we strike King's Landing from the west and the south, while your Dornish allies cross the border, the city could fall in weeks, assuming no major houses intervene on the Lannisters' behalf. The Storm Lords might rally to your cause, or they might not. The Vale is a question, the North is a question, but with the Tyrell host and the Dornish in unison, King's Landing would likely surrender. Daenerys forced herself not to exhale in relief too quickly. That is my assessment as well. Our first move must be to secure the roads leading to the capital to control the grain supply. If the capital starves, the people will turn on the Lannisters. Olenna cackled quietly. You speak with the cunning of a royal. I'll grant you that. Starve them out. Very well. I will speak with my son Mace with the rest of House Tyrell. Discreetly, of course. Once we are ready, we shall cut off the crown's supply lines. You must be prepared to strike swiftly. Understood. Prince Doran is readying Dornish forces as we speak. I can bring my Unsullied up the Boneway or the Prince's Pass, whichever route is least exposed. We will converge on the Crownlands, perhaps near the Blackwater. Olenna nodded, tapping her cane again. Yes, yes, this might work. And if it fails, we will all lose our heads. But that's the Game of Thrones, child. She rose abruptly, leaning on her attendants for support. Now I need rest. I'm too old for these clandestine discussions in dusty keeps. But I will gather the Tyrell banner lords soon. Expect my raven. And if you betray me, or if you show the same madness as your father, well. She gave Daenerys a meaningful glare. I have a few knives hidden away for that. Daenerys managed a tight smile. I do not intend betrayal, Lady Olenna. With that, the old woman shuffled off, her attendants trailing. Daenerys remained, breathing in the musty air, letting the tension flow out of her limbs. Nymeria and Obara exchanged a look of grudging respect. Yora and Barristan inclined their heads, acknowledging the step forward that had been achieved. Missandei wore a contemplative expression, as though imagining how the realm would react once the Tyrells openly declared for Daenerys. It would be a storm, indeed. They emerged into the courtyard, the sun high overhead. A hush fell among their men. Daenerys signaled that all was well. She felt a surge of cautious triumph. The Tyrells were the last major pillar of Lannister support. If they peeled away, it would gut the crown's power. Coupled with Dorne, it could mean the swift downfall of House Lannister. Then the throne would be hers and everything that came with it. Still, doubt not at her. Would the realm truly embrace another Targaryen after so much war and bloodshed? Would she find the rest of Westeros as pliable as these first alliances suggested? And what if the cost of victory demanded acts that tarnished her soul further, demanded cruelty beyond reason? She thought of Drogon's distant roars, of the slaves left behind, of the Unsullied marching like ghosts at her beck and call. She shook off the gloomy reverie. For now, there was only one path forward, onward to King's Landing, to the seat of power her ancestors once ruled. She guided her company out of Horn Hill, riding with the knowledge that a great wave was building, a wave that would soon crash over the Seven Kingdoms. As they departed, thunderheads gathered in the distance, hinting at an approaching storm, as though the very air carried the promise of upheaval. Daenerys Targaryen lifted her chin, meeting the horizon with unwavering resolve. The game was set. She had come too far, spent too much, forsaken too many ideals to stop now. One day, she told herself, she would redeem all those sacrifices once she had the power to do so. Until then, she would press on, the chains of her Unsullied clinking in her wake like a whispered reminder of the price she had paid. She rode onward, chasing destiny with each hoofbeat. And destiny, for better or worse, had opened its gates to welcome the Dragon Queen's next triumphant or tragic stride.